Welcome back to Dreamland Encounters. This channel is all about sharing real-life stories of mysterious encounters from beyond the skies. Before we jump into tonight's story, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you tuning in from? Drop a comment and let me know. My story begins on a late September evening. I was flying my little Cessna 172 home after a business trip, cruising around 5,500 feet over the farmlands just outside Wichita, Kansas. The sun had set maybe 20 minutes earlier, leaving behind that strange twilight. Not quite day, not quite night. I'd made this flight hundreds of times before. But something felt different this time. A metallic object caught my eye in the peripheral vision, hovering just above the cornfields to my right. At first, I thought it might be another plane or a drone. As I looked closer, nothing about it made sense. The object was bright, reflecting the last light of day, but its shape was unlike anything I'd ever seen in the sky, almost disc-like, but more angular, like a flattened diamond with rounded edges. No blinking lights, no sound. Just this solid, reflective shape hanging motionless. I initially assumed it was some experimental military technology. They're always testing new things, but then it did something that completely changed my understanding. Not a gentle glide or a smooth hover, but a sharp, precise 90-degree turn to the left. There was no visible acceleration or deceleration. It was as if the object was sliding through the air on invisible rails. As a pilot, I know how physics work. Something that size shouldn't be able to move like that without tearing itself apart. And yet, it did. I sat frozen, watching as it disappeared behind a low ridge of trees. My brain struggled to process what I just witnessed. Instinctively, I adjusted my heading to follow it. But when I crested the ridge, nothing was there. No trail, no noise, just empty sky. My instruments showed nothing unusual. The radio was silent. I was alone in the cockpit, my heart racing, trying to convince myself I hadn't imagined the entire encounter. The rest of the flight was uneventful, but my hands were still shaking when I finally touched down at my home airstrip. They wore black uniforms typical of government or military agents, but with no visible insignia or badge. Both stood serious and silent, watching intently as I climbed down. Breaking the silence, I asked, "Can I help you?" One of them stepped forward, and down found. Breaking the silence, I asked, "Can I help you?" Without introduction, posed an unusual question. "Do you believe in physics or just experience?" Confused, I replied, "What do you mean?" While I spoke, the other man pulled out a small black device with a screen and buttons, quietly manipulating it. I glanced nervously at the runway, then back at them. Something about their calm demeanor made me uneasy. "I saw something strange up here," I said quietly. A metallic object that moved in an inexplicable way. The man with the device looked up and nodded. "We know," he said. Then the first man asked, "Did it seem aware of you watching?" I hesitated, unsure if I was just projecting fear. "I don't know. It didn't make sound or blink lights, but the way it turned felt deliberate." They exchanged a meaningful look. The second man spoke ominously. "Things like that don't just happen by accident. You've seen something you shouldn't have." When I tried to ask what they meant, words caught in my throat. Instead, I managed, "Who are you?" They didn't answer. Instead, the first man stated coldly, "You'll hear from us again. Until then, keep your experience to yourself." Then they walked away, climbing into a plateless black SUV parked near the runway. I watched dust settle behind their tires, my mind racing. Over the next few days, nothing happened. I told only Lisa about the encounter, and even then, I omitted most details. The story sounded crazy when spoken aloud. but the strangeness continued. Every time I flew over that farmland, I felt watched. Sometimes I'd glimpse something reflective at the forest's edge, but it always vanished when I tried to get closer. On one late flight, my radio suddenly crackled with static, though I was on a clear frequency. No words, just a low buzzing that lasted about 30 seconds before cutting out completely. I was working in late September on a wildlife project tracking owl and bat movements near Ashland, Oregon. As a wildlife biologist, I'd set up a small trailer on the edge of a forest clearing where we'd tagged some animals. Most nights I spent my time watching and recording. That night around 11 p.m., I stepped outside to check some motion sensors near the tree line. The air was cool, smelling of pine needles and damp earth. It was completely still. No wind, no rustling leaves, just the usual night sounds. While scanning the treetops with my flashlight, something caught my attention. A faint glow hovered about 100 feet above the trees. But there was no sound, no buzz, no rotor noise. Just a quiet, steady light. It wasn't moving like a typical drone would. Instead, it hovered motionless just over the tree canopy, emitting a diffuse, pale white light with a slight bluish tint. I stared, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe it was an aircraft I didn't recognize, but everything felt wrong. The absolute silence struck me most. In all my years around wildlife and occasional low-flying planes, there's always some noise. I tried to take a picture with my phone, but the camera wouldn't focus properly. The light seemed to interfere with the technology somehow. This experience reminded me of another strange encounter shared by a pilot friend. His instruments would inexplicably lose GPS signal in the same area, and he'd seen mysterious men who seemed to be watching him. When he mentioned this to an old crop duster pilot, Mr. Jenkins, the man, simply nodded and said strange things had been reported in the area for years. Some experiences defy easy explanation, leaving us with more questions than answers. No, the night was strange from the start. Lights blurred across my screen, interference or sensor issues making everything seem off. Suddenly I vanished. One moment present, the next completely gone. I checked my setup carefully. Motion sensors and cameras I'd meticulously installed revealed nothing unusual. The forest looked perfectly normal. Owl calls and bat movements continued exactly as they always had. No signs of aircraft or unexpected light. Days passed. The mysterious occurrence didn't repeat. Then, just after dusk about a week later, 2 unexpected visitors arrived at my research trailer. I was mid-sample cataloging when a knock interrupted my work. 2 men stood outside wearing dark suits and plain black coats. They didn't look like typical officials. No badges or standard uniforms, just laminated ID cards hanging from chains. They introduced themselves as Agent Blake and Agent Crane, claiming to represent a federal wildlife compliance office I'd never heard of. Their questions focused on local animal migration and recent anomalies. I hesitated, thinking about the strange light I'd witnessed. Carefully, I responded that everything seemed ordinary, owls and bats following typical patterns. Agent Crane's slow nod suggested skepticism. Blake commented about my recent reports, suggesting they needed help getting records in order. They requested to review my notes and raw data files. Feeling uneasy, I agreed. After an hour, they left a sealed folder labeled "Corrected Data" on my desk. When I opened it later, I discovered printed pages that looked like my reports, but subtly altered. Movement patterns appeared more consistent, with certain details mysteriously removed. Attempts to verify their agency failed. Phone numbers didn't work, and no one seemed to know anything about these men or their office. In the following days, strange developments continued. The animals I'd been tracking began behaving oddly. One morning, I discovered a dozen bird carcasses beneath a roost, a disturbing development that deepened the mounting mystery. I'd been planning this weekend hike for weeks, needing to escape city noise and deadlines. I'm Mark Reynolds, 35, living in Portland, but always exploring Oregon's remote areas. This trail near an old Cold War radar station in the Cascades isn't a tourist spot. Just locals and occasional hikers like me know about it. Late October brought cold, damp weather. I set up camp just past the tree line around 7 p.m. near the abandoned radar installation's remnants. Most concrete and metal were gone, leaving only foundation slabs and a few rusted antenna pieces. That's when a strange, deep hum began. Not like any engine or animal sound I recognized. It was constant, vibrating through ground and air simultaneously. Later, things got weird. The bats stopped coming out entirely. When walking near the tree line at night, I'd catch fleeting shadow movements just out of sight. I couldn't tell if they were animals or something else. One night, I heard a low hum like a distant engine, but the sky was clear with no planes or helicopters. My phone started glitching, static on calls and strange camera interference. My laptop died completely the day after the men visited. Just bricked itself. Whenever I tried working, something always interfered. Data would vanish. Notes disappeared from files. The men never returned, but I kept finding traces, a strange folder, occasional mentions of a wildlife research compliance check that seemed unknown to others. I moved my trailer a few miles away and stopped field work. The forest felt different after that night with the light, like something had shifted, though I couldn't pinpoint what. I still go out sometimes, looking up at the trees, but don't expect to see anything. Just normal night sounds and the occasional owl. No flash or boom, no obvious craft or beings. Just a quiet light, two men who didn't quite belong, and a forest that doesn't behave like it used to. I stopped what I was doing and listened. A noise was coming from just beyond the tree line. Grabbing my flashlight, I headed toward the edge, trying to see what could be making that sound. Then I noticed the lights. These weren't normal lights at all. They were small, moving slowly just beneath the trees, flickering faintly. More like pale bluish orbs gliding quietly in the shadows than flashlights or lanterns. The darkness and dense forest made it hard to tell how many there were or what was causing their movement. They didn't look like people or animals. Nothing familiar. Quietly, I backed away and returned to my camp, phone ready, but careful not to make noise. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a research team running tests or some weird kind of drone. But there was no chatter, just a low, unchanging hum. That night, I slept uneasily, waking several times to check the sounds. Nothing else happened. The next day, I hiked further up the trail, hoping to find more signs of activity. The forest was quiet, with only the usual rustle of leaves and distant bird calls. Nothing unusual caught my eye. Back at my cabin that evening, a small rented place about 10 miles from the trailhead, I sat outside watching the stars. The night was clear and cold. Suddenly, headlights appeared, moving down the nearby road. A black sedan, probably a late model, passed slowly. At first, I didn't think much of it. People sometimes drive out here late. But then I realized the headlights were completely off. I blinked, thinking I was mistaken. No, the car was driving in total darkness, passing my cabin at a steady pace. Over the next 2 nights, the same pattern continued. Exactly every hour, that black car drove past without headlights, never changing speed. I tried to flag it down the first time, flashing my flashlight, but it didn't react. No brake lights, no signals, just the same, steady drive. Something felt wrong, like a scene from a movie. I checked for power line issues or nearby outages, but everything else had lights. He gave me a weird look, and asked if I was sure it wasn't just a truck. My work trip from a client meeting in MTN, Arkansas back to Little Rock was supposed to be a straightforward drive, around 3 hours depending on how much I wanted to play with the back roads. I left just after dinner, around 7 p.m., hoping to get ahead of the fog that typically rolls in around midnight. About halfway through, near Forge Mountain, my GPS suggested an unusual route. Something felt off from the start. The forest seemed thicker, the air heavier. I noticed a black car that kept passing by, and a strange low hum that seemed to follow me. That night, after the car drove by again, I heard the hum outside the cabin, faint but definitely present. Standing by the window, I scanned the dark forest line beyond the road, but saw nothing. The next day, I tried hiking back to the radar site in daylight. At the site, I discovered something peculiar. Several concrete slabs looked freshly cracked, as if something substantial had recently pressed down on them. I snapped some pictures, uncertain what to make of the scene. The sense of being watched grew stronger. Before bed, I meticulously checked all cabin locks. Just after midnight, the hum returned, louder this time, vibrating through walls and floor. The black car was back, stopped across the street. Engine off, no lights. A dark-clothed figure stepped out, standing perfectly still before returning to the car and driving away. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I packed quickly and left. I tried convincing myself it was nothing. Maybe a local prank or some surveillance, but couldn't shake thoughts of the hum, the lights beneath the trees, and that silent car. Since then, I haven't returned to the area late at night. I sometimes think I hear that low hum when the wind blows just right. I still don't know what happened or who was driving that car. Weeks have passed, and while I can't be entirely certain of every detail, I know something unusual occurred. That much is clear. I was driving on a winding rural road lined with pine trees and utility poles. No other cars had passed me for at least 30 minutes. The route was supposed to be a shortcut, cutting off a few minutes by skipping a construction area near Ola. A radio tower caught my attention, sitting just beyond the tree line, one of those standard red and white striped towers with a blinking beacon on top. Arkansas has hundreds like it, so nothing seemed unusual at first, but something felt off. The silence was eerie. No bugs, no tree frogs, strange for late September. Then my car began acting weird. The engine didn't exactly stall, but softened with RPMs dropping low, even as I pressed the gas. Dashboard lights flickered, and the headlights dimmed. I noticed the tower's beacon had stopped blinking. Instead, it glowed a steady red. That's when I saw it. Something floating above the tower, about 50 feet higher, dark and massive, like an overturned dinner plate. No lights, no reflection. Just hanging perfectly still, I slowed to a crawl, partially off the road. The radio was already off, but the screen showed only static and blank numbers. Suddenly, the engine cut completely. No sputtering, no warning, just dead silence. The cabin light turned on by itself. The AC blew hot for a moment, despite being set to cool. My hands shook, though I didn't feel cold. My senses seemed disconnected, lagging somehow. Turning the key produced nothing. Not even a click. Looking back, I saw the red light had vanished. The dark shape remained, floating against the sky. I couldn't make out details, just its outline, a little wider than the tower's platform, and about half as tall. Strangely, no sound accompanied its presence. It should have made some noise at that proximity. A motor, a hum, anything. Then it moved, not rotating or tilting, but sliding smoothly sideways about 20 feet, then sinking down behind the trees. Its movement was controlled, almost deliberate, around 12:30 a.m. and kept quiet. Not a word to my boss, roommate, or parents. I didn't even jot down a note. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe the car had a weird glitch, and the thing in the sky was just a trick of light. That's what I told myself all night. Next morning, I was in the driveway clearing pine needles off the windshield when a black sedan pulled up across the street. It wasn't a police car, no decals or bars. Just a regular Crown Vic with tinted windows and a small antenna. A man stepped out, white, maybe mid-50s, wearing a suit and tie, no badge, no clipboard. He walked up the driveway, slowly, like someone used to being let in. Stopping about 6 feet from me, he smiled. I nodded automatically. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. I'm here to follow up on your vehicle malfunction. Last night, approximately 9:42 p.m. Highway 314 near the FM tower west of Hollis. I couldn't speak. He unfolded the paper and held it out. It looked like a waiver. The ECB malfunction liability release was printed in all caps. Beneath that, a short paragraph in legal language about acknowledging no damage and confirming I hadn't filed a complaint. My name was already printed next to a blank line. I hadn't told anyone. I hadn't even Googled the location. How did you? How did you? He just smiled again. Not friendly, just flat. No repairs necessary, correct? Vehicles functional. I nodded, not reaching for the paper. He tapped it with his finger, almost urging me to sign. I didn't. He held the paper for a few seconds, then folded it back up, returned it to his coat, and nodded like we'd finished a conversation. Thank you for your time. Then he walked back to his car, got in, and drove off. No visible license plate, or if there was one, it didn't have numbers I recognized. Earlier that night, the car had been strange, as if gravity didn't apply. Once I disappeared. A red beacon blinked once. The radio came back to life, cutting in mid-word like someone had unpaused it. Headlights brightened. I turned the key, and the engine started right up. No issues. I didn't stick around. I floored it. The car fishtailed a little on the shoulder before speeding back onto the main road. My hands didn't stop shaking until I hit Darnell. I looked for tire marks later. Nothing. No sign he'd even been here. The car has been fine ever since. Nor been Novia Vega Bay since late March, coming out around 4:45 a.m. to beat the crowds. It's a remote spot where the waves break clean before the wind picks up. As a 31-year-old who works part-time at a hardware store in Santa Rosa, surfing is pretty much my only passion since moving from inland. That particular morning was different, cold, despite the forecast calling for 60s, with an oddly metallic air. The tide was moving slower than usual, and the foam barely touched the usual rock markers. When I started down the steep, narrow trail, something felt off. I was about to stop midway, as I normally do, to check the swells when I noticed the stars had vanished. At first I thought it was fog, but this wasn't low-lying marine layer. The entire sky above the water, from about 30 to off the horizon to directly overhead, was just blank. Behind me, toward land, the sky remained clear with Orion and the Pleiades visible. No lights, radio still working. I kept blinking, trying to make sense of it. The blank area wasn't dark exactly. It just looked wrong, like someone had cut a chunk out of the sky. I crouched near a twisted little pine board resting against my knees. Then the silence hit me. No gulls. No tide sounds. No wind in the grass. Just a weird pressure in my ears, like a plane descending too fast. The water had gone completely flat, smooth as glass, something I'd never seen in 3 years of surfing this beach, not even during red tides. I still drive this route for work sometimes, but I never take that detour anymore. Never seen that shape again. And I won't. I was down by the path near my van, feeling an unexplainable weight pressing on my chest, urging me to leave. Without warning, I jumped up, nearly dropping my board, and hurried back to the vehicle. The van itself was nothing special, just a Silver Six Dodge with sand-crusted carpets and a busted sliding door I never bother locking. It's my sole tool for early morning surf runs. When I topped the hill and saw it again, everything looked completely normal. No lights, no people around. Still shaken, I decided to call my buddy Darren from Salmon Creek to see if he'd noticed anything strange. As I yanked open the driver's door and climbed in, I froze. A man was sitting in the back seat, dead silent, completely motionless. He faced forward, hands resting flat on his knees, wearing a black suit and shirt, with no tie. His skin was pale as paper, with no discernible age or defining features, just a blank, indeterminate presence. I couldn't speak, just stared through the rearview mirror, breathing hard. Was the van unlocked? Was the van unlocked? Had someone slipped in while I was away? None of it made sense. Then he spoke. "Does the ocean ever show you things?" His voice was hollow, devoid of emotion. When he slightly turned his head toward me, not fully, just enough to indicate awareness, he added, "You're here often. Stay long enough, it shows you more." I managed a weak "what?" in response. But he said nothing more, simply turning his head back forward. I remained frozen, keys in hand, board wedged against the passenger seat, every muscle locked. The moment I turned to face him directly, he vanished. No sound, no movement, no door opening. The seat was empty. I scrambled out, checking under and around the van. Nothing was disturbed. The gravel, the grass, all untouched. It was like he'd blinked out of existence. For 10 or 15 minutes, I sat on the hood, trying to calm myself. I wasn't tired. I hadn't been drinking. I hadn't hit my head or taken anything unusual. And everything had felt incredibly real. Eventually, I climbed back in and checked the rearview mirror again. Empty. Just my crusty towel and a bag of fins. I was heading back to Bishop from my sister's place in Carson City, taking US 395 south. The route was longer, but easier on my car, and I enjoy night drives. Less traffic, no heat, and the freedom to listen to whatever I want without thinking about time. It was late, around 11:45 p.m. on a Tuesday in March. Cold but dry, with a clear sky and no moon that I could recall. The road stretched out quietly, long open spaces between black hills and desert scrub, about 20 miles north of Bridgeport. I was alone on the highway when something caught my eye. At first, I thought it was a flare or a low-flying plane. A soft yellowish glow, about the size of a bus from my perspective, drifted slowly above the western ridgeline. It wasn't flickering or moving quickly. Instead, it seemed to hover and pulse gently as it floated sideways before dropping behind the hill and vanishing. No drama, no noise, no beam of light. It simply sank behind the ridge and disappeared. I eased off the gas and pulled onto the shoulder, not dramatically slamming the brakes. My first thought was a possible crash, maybe a small aircraft or weather balloon, but I hadn't heard any impact. As the engine idled, I sat there trying to decide whether to get out or continue driving. Then headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. Initially, they were distant dim points bouncing on the highway, but they closed the gap quickly. A plain black SUV with deep tint and unfamiliar government plates pulled up behind me about 15 feet back. No one emerged. The engine remained running, its headlights cut off, idling quieter than expected for a vehicle of its size. I wondered if they were Highway Patrol BLM or some other officials checking on me. But minutes passed, first 5, then 10, and still no one approached my window. Weeks later, I returned to the beach. Everything looked normal on the surface. The water was choppy. Again, birds had returned, but something felt off. The rail carried a faint copper smell, and I noticed the waves breaking about 10 feet further out than usual. I hadn't surfed here since June. Nor here's the rewritten text. The drive home was unusually tense. Cold air seeped through a cracked window with only the engine's hum breaking the silence. My side mirror revealed nothing, just a dark blob where a driver should be. An SUV pulled up beside me, stopping perfectly even with my window. We sat like that for about 20 seconds. No movement, no lights, just the steady idle of an engine. When it finally drove away, I watched the taillights fade into darkness. Something felt off. I was wired, but more confused than scared. I arrived home around 1:30 a.m. My small rental sits outside town, a 2-bedroom place with a fenced yard and a cracked driveway, backing up to a dry creek bed. After pulling into the driveway, I sat for a moment before going inside. Normal routine followed. Kitchen light on, cat fed, a glass of water, then settling onto the couch to mindlessly scroll my phone. Maybe 20 minutes passed. Then came the knocking. 3 quick taps. Not loud. Not the doorbell, just knuckles against glass. I froze, wondering if I'd imagined it. But it came again, same rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. At the front window, I pulled back the curtain. No car. No movement outside. I flipped on the porch light and opened the door. Empty. But there, taped precisely at eye level, a black envelope. Matif, finish, square corners. No markings. Just a piece of black tape holding it in place. I stood there a long time before removing it. Unsealed, simply folded shut. Inside, a single heavy cardstock piece, like an expensive wedding invitation, blank except for a short printed line in the center. Not everything drifts down. No name, no number. No explanation. I checked the street again, quiet. Even the porch light seemed dimmer. I stayed awake the rest of the night, knowing I couldn't call anyone. What would I even say? The tower was old, barely updated, and I was the only controller on duty for most shifts. I liked the solitude. It let me zone out a bit, focus on the radio chatter and my screens. One evening around 9:30 p.m., something weird caught my attention on the radar. The weather was clear but chilly, a crisp fall night with the moon out. Way above the usual flight paths, something big was sitting still, just hovering over the mountains to the west of the airport. At first, I thought it was a glitch. I reset the radar, checked the power supply, and even restarted the system. The dot stayed right where it was. I checked the flight schedule and the radar transponder list. Calling the FAA regional office, I asked if they had any notices of unusual traffic. No flights reported, no military exercises, no helicopters, no drones. The dot was massive compared to other blips from planes flying through that airspace. But it made no radio calls. No transponder code. It was just there. I reported it on my routine logs, describing the object as an unidentified stationary radar contact, and sent the information up the chain of command. I thought maybe someone higher up would look into it. Later that night around 11 p.m., the power flickered once, but the system stayed up. I kept an eye on the radar. but the contact vanished sometime before midnight. I assumed it was a radar glitch or some interference. The next day was uneventful. I checked in with my supervisor over the phone. She sounded odd, distracted, maybe even a little annoyed. She asked if I was sure about the report, then said the radar data wasn't showing anything unusual in that sector. I keep the envelope. It's in the drawer next to my bed. I never showed it to anyone. I didn't throw it out either. I checked the front camera. It's motion activated, sending a clip to my phone when someone's near the porch. The last alert I sent was from 8:17 p.m., hours before I go home. After that, nothing. Just a gap between then and sunrise. I didn't drive that route for a while. Still don't, unless I have to. Note, I got a call in the afternoon from someone I didn't recognize. They said they were with a federal aviation agency and would be coming to the tower for a routine check, though they didn't specify exactly when. Right around 7 p.m., 3 men arrived at the airport entrance. Their appearance was striking, dressed identically in black coats and simple button-up shirts without ties. They looked to be in their late 40s or early 50s, with short graying hair. Their faces seemed almost rehearsed, maintaining a neutral expression that attempted to appear friendly. When they flashed their badges, I immediately noticed something unusual. These credentials didn't match any federal or state agencies I was familiar with. When I asked which specific agency they represented, their answers remained vague, mentioning something about special aviation oversight. They requested to see the radar logs and recordings from the previous night. I complied, showing them everything: screen prints, my notes, and the radar system recordings. They reviewed the materials quietly, exchanging brief, hushed comments I couldn't quite understand. One of them looked up and made an unsettling comment about my imaginative writing style for a tower operator. His tone was polite, but something felt off, like a subtle warning was embedded in his words. They asked to calibrate some equipment and requested access to the radar console for about 20 minutes. Agreed and let them work. During this time, I stepped into the break room for a drink. When I returned, they had vanished. No goodbye, no note, nothing. I noticed the tower logbook was missing. The thick binder where I documented everything from flight plans to radio calls, including my report about the strange radar contact. Calling my supervisor in the FAA office revealed that no one had authorized these men to visit or take the logs. Adding to the strangeness, the security cameras were offline that evening, supposedly due to unannounced maintenance. In the following days, I tried to investigate. The radar system showed no trace of the contact I had reported. My supervisor seemed to avoid the topic entirely, treating it like a mistake on my part. My only other discovery was a faint smell of ozone or burned wires near the radar console. Those men and their strange badges kept replaying in my mind, their odd comments lingering like an unresolved mystery. Here's the rewritten text. I'm Jordan Mills, and I've worked with the National Weather Service for about 5 years now. My job mostly involves remote monitoring and radar operations from small, isolated outposts. This particular station sits on a ridge 10 miles east of the Cerreto Mountains, far from any town. If something unusual happens out here, you're completely on your own. It was late April, around 10 p.m., and I was doing my usual radar scan. The work is routine, checking precipitation and wind patterns, but a few hours earlier, something strange had caught my attention. A massive stationary mass was hovering over the northern part of the mountain range. At first, I thought it might be a technical glitch or interference, but I kept watching. The object wasn't moving, and it definitely wasn't weather-related. No rain, no snow, just a dense, well-defined shape sitting there. I couldn't tell if it was a cloud or something else entirely. When I tried adjusting the frequency and recalibrating the radar, the shape remained consistent and sharply edged. This was unlike anything I'd tracked before, and I've monitored everything from thunderstorms to dust devils. The mass covered at least 5 miles and was too large to be a plane or bird flock. Strangely, it wasn't showing up on any satellite images. Around midnight, the old landline phone rang. I almost didn't answer, as late-night calls were typically from dispatch or maintenance. But something about the ringing made me pick up. A man's voice, low and calm, said, "We need to come by your station. It's regarding the equipment." When I asked who was calling, the line went dead. No caller ID, no trace. I returned to the radar feed, feeling uneasy. The object on the screen hadn't changed at all. I wondered if they were government inspectors or something else entirely. I started staying at the airport longer after my shift ended that week, waiting to see if anyone else would show up. No one did. Eventually, I left the job. The whole experience left me unsettled, like someone had quietly rewritten the facts of what I'd seen. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I think about that dot on the radar. Big, still, and unexplained, and the men who came to erase the record. I don't know what it was or who they were, but I know I wasn't imagining it. A knock echoed at the station's front door. 2 men stood outside. They looked identical, tall, mid-40s, wearing spotless black coats that seemed out of place at a mountain outpost. Their hair was slicked back, faces unreadable. I wasn't expecting anyone, and no visitors were allowed without clearance. Checking the security cameras, I saw them standing there. Hesitantly, I opened the door a crack. "Good evening," one said flatly. "We're here to calibrate your radar." I explained I couldn't let anyone in, especially at this hour. They produced a badge with an embossed seal I didn't recognize. The details were unclear, but it looked official. Arguing seemed pointless in the middle of nowhere, so I let them inside. They moved directly to the radar console and started working. Their movements were precise. They pressed buttons, typed in unfamiliar sequences, adjusted frequencies, and rerouted data. It didn't look like standard calibration to me. The entire time they remained silent except for the soft hum of equipment. After about 20 minutes, they packed up without a word. A quick nod, and they were gone. I locked the door behind them and tried to check the radar again. The huge stationary mass had vanished. The rest of the night felt strange. The station's air seemed stale and screens flickered intermittently. When I checked the system logs, something was wrong. The past 8 hours of data had disappeared, not deleted, simply gone. The system acted as if the information never existed. I verified the backup drives, empty. I contacted dispatch about records. They confirmed our station's radar showed nothing during that time. My supervisor seemed confused when I reported the incident the next morning. He claimed no one was authorized to enter and no visitors appeared on security feeds. Later that day, I went to town for coffee. I mentioned the missing logs to some locals, but no one noticed anything unusual in the sky or mountains. I continued monitoring the radar, but the shape never reappeared. Here's the revised text. The hiking trip started early one September morning, just after Labor Day weekend. And from about 3 hours south, near Pacopy, and solo hiking is something I know well. This time I was heading to the Adirondacks, a route I had traveled before. Drive up, camp for 2 nights, pack light, get away from everything. I arrived at the Indian Lake trailhead around 6:30 a.m. A white Outback with Vermont plates was the only other vehicle, though no one seemed to be around. My plan was a 6-hour loop hike. The weather was perfect. Cool, low 60s, clear skies with no wind or fog. The first few hours were completely normal. Deer wandered nearby. Woodpeckers echoed through the trees. I stopped for lunch at a small ridge overlooking a dense northern forest. Around 1:30 p.m., I continued my trek. About 2/3 into the loop, something changed. 3 red lights appeared, each about the size of a dime at arm's length. They flickered just above the tree line to my left, not quite in the sky, but hovering over the valley. Their rhythm was odd, blinking in a way I couldn't quite understand. I stopped and watched. No sounds. No movement in the trees. Just these lights, maybe 100 yards out. Instinctively, I pulled out my phone to record. They remained visible as I zoomed in, though the camera struggled to focus through the trees. When I lowered the phone and looked back at the screen, they had vanished. Something felt different after that moment. I wasn't scared, exactly, but I felt watched. I'd stop occasionally, convinced I'd heard footsteps just out of sync with my own. I tried to rationalize it. Nerves, maybe an animal. But I quickened my pace. I returned to the trailhead just before 4 p.m. The white Outback was still there, even now. Late at night, I sometimes scan the skies toward the San Cristo range. The radar never shows anything like that day or night. But occasionally, when the wind is calm and the air feels thick, I could swear I hear that low hum, as if the station itself is remembering something. The drive back south was uneventful at first. The sun still hung in the sky, and I hoped to make it home before dark. Around Shrew Lake, a black car appeared behind me. I couldn't make out the model. Maybe a Dodge or Lincoln with those deeply tinted windows that block all visibility. At first, the car seemed to be a random coincidence. It maintained the same pace, speeding up and slowing down with me. We continued south on I-87, and after 30 minutes, I realized something was off. The car should have peeled away by now, but it remained. No license plates, just a blank surface. I tried to get a better look, switching lanes and even taking a random exit near Ticonderoga to see if it would follow. It did. The sky darkened as I pulled into a small rest stop, just a pull-off with a trash can and picnic table. I parked and cut the engine. The black car pulled in a few spots away. No one got out. Minutes ticked by. My heart raced as I watched the rearview mirror. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Eventually, I started the car and pulled back onto the highway. The black car followed. An hour later, I passed Albany and realized I needed gas. The fuel needle was low. I exited near Seneca Station in Kinderhook. By now, it was completely dark. The black car pulled into the far end of the lot while I filled up. Inside the station, I paid cash, mostly to keep an eye on the car through the windows. When I returned, they were parked right next to my vehicle. The driver's side window was down. A man, maybe late 40s, clean-shaven, wearing a black ball cap and zip-up hoodie, sat silently. Without emotion, he held out a small black USB stick. "Replace your footage with this," he said, repeating it louder when I didn't respond. I took the stick, unsure why. He rolled up the window, reversed out, and drove away. I stood there, stunned, holding the USB for what felt like an eternity. The rest of the drive home was quiet. No more black car, no followers, just me, trying to understand what had just happened. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I plugged in the USB, my mind racing with questions. Won an old laptop the next morning, one I hadn't used in years, empty, no folders, just a single file labeled vid.mp4. 10 minutes long, but when I opened it, static filled the screen. Not the visual white noise you'd expect, just a gray screen with faint crackling and a high-pitched tone every few seconds, like an old CRT TV powering up. I watched the entire thing, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. I never shared the footage from the hike, didn't delete it either. But when I went back to check, the video wouldn't load. Corrupt file, it said. I tried copying it to my computer, renaming it, using print software. Nothing worked. The thumbnail was just black. A week later, I drove back to Indian Lake. Not to hike, just to see if the white Outback was still there. It wasn't. Instead, another black car was parked in the same spot. Different model, same no-plate situation I kept driving. That was last fall. Haven't been back since. We weren't seeking anything unusual. Just me and my buddy Greg at his uncle's hunting cabin for the weekend. Located in northern Minnesota, about a 40-minute drive from any town, tucked between a frozen lake and logging roads that don't get plowed in winter. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, no neighbors. Just a wood stove and firewood stacked against the cabin. Quiet was exactly what we wanted. We arrived Friday evening after dark. February. Probably 12 degrees out, but the sky was clear and star-packed. We'd brought food, beer, and snowshoes. Plan was a 2-night stay. Some hiking, maybe ice fishing if we could dig out the gear. Saturday morning, we took our time with coffee and eggs, heading out around 11 o'clock. A narrow trail cuts east from the back of the property, winding through thick birch and pine stands past a collapsed shed and climbing up a ridge. Greg remembered an old fire tower used to stand at the top, though he hadn't been here in about a decade. We packed light, a thermos, a few granola bars, snowshoes strapped to our boots. The snow was deep but packed in spots so we didn't sink too much. About 2 hours to reach the ridge top. Not steep, just a steady climb. We didn't talk much. Too quiet out there. Our footsteps echoed loudly. Even the trees were silent. The abandoned fire tower stood before us, a rusted wooden structure barely holding together. 40 feet tall, it seemed to defy gravity with half-rotted steps and a faded no trespassing sign clinging desperately to one of its supports. We paused, catching our breath, watching crows drift overhead. The winter light cast everything in a soft bluish glow, and the sun hung low despite it being only 3:30 in the afternoon. Greg tapped my arm and pointed beyond the tree line. There, floating about 30 or 40 feet off the ground, was something strange, a white orb roughly the size of a basketball. It wasn't moving like a plane or drone, just hovering completely motionless and silent. I tried to rationalize it, thinking maybe it was sunlight hitting ice, but that didn't make sense. Greg muttered, "That's not right," and the eerie silence was overwhelming. No wind, no bird sounds, just absolute stillness. When I pulled out my phone to take a picture, there was no signal. The screen flickered with static, behaving in a way I'd never seen before. Looking up, I noticed the orb had shifted slightly, a few feet higher and to the right, still utterly smooth and soundless. Then, just like that, it blinked out. Not flying away, just gone. We started back, walking faster than necessary. The woods felt wrong, as if something unseen was tracking our movements just beyond our vision. Back at the cabin, we didn't even remove our boots. We poured whiskey and sat in silence, processing what we'd witnessed. Later that night, we dissected every detail. Was it a drone? A flare? Some unknown atmospheric phenomenon. Nothing explained its impossible movement, so smooth, so silent. No flickering, no sound. Sleep came fitfully. Every so often I'd imagine hearing snow crunching outside, sitting up to listen, then hearing nothing. Greg tossed and turned, equally unsettled by our unexplained encounter. We decided to head into town the next morning, just to shake off the nerves. There's a small store about 30 minutes away that sells jerky, propane, and weird local crafts. We grabbed some snacks and filled up the tank, trying to talk about normal stuff. When we got back to the cabin, Greg's truck was parked in the same spot we left it, but something was off. A man sat in the passenger seat, waiting for us. He looked like a lawyer or banker. Black suit, black coat, no hat, pale skin, clean-shaven, maybe in his mid-50s, completely out of place in that setting. We stopped walking and just stared. He opened the passenger door slowly, stepping out with a smile that was too wide and too long. Not fake, exactly, but like someone copying how a smile should look. His voice was soft and clear, almost as if he was talking directly into our heads, even though he stood 6 feet away. "That wasn't meant for you," he said. When Greg asked who he was, the man just kept smiling. Then he shut the truck door and walked straight into the woods. No coat, no gloves, no hat, like the cold didn't affect him at all. We didn't follow. We just stood there, frozen. After maybe 30 seconds, Greg checked the truck. Nothing seemed touched or missing, but the interior was warm, as if the heat had been running, even though the keys were in Greg's pocket the whole time. We stayed one more night, barely speaking. We didn't light a fire, just locked the doors and kept the blinds shut. I didn't even take off my boots. In the morning, we left early and haven't been back since. Greg's uncle says we're welcome any time, but we keep making excuses. I've never really told anyone else about it. What would I say? That we saw a man in a suit who walked into the snow like it was nothing? It happened on a night I was driving home from my second shift at a packaging plant just outside Greensburg, Indiana, near I-74. It was around 12:40 a.m., maybe a little later. The roads were completely empty, not unusual for that stretch of CR 700E. You could drive for miles without passing a single car. No street lights, just long stretches of corn and soy fields with occasional mailboxes at the end of gravel drives. I was about 15 minutes from home, sipping the last of my gas station coffee when I noticed the radio cutting out. Not staticky, just silent. Idea. Just silent hum late one night. The radio started dropping out, cutting silent for 2 or 3 seconds at a time before popping back in mid-sentence. I thought it was just the station, but when I flipped through other channels, they were doing the same thing. Then my headlights dimmed, not completely, just down to about half brightness for a few seconds before returning to normal. That's when I slowed down and noticed something unusual ahead. Off to the left side of the road, about a quarter mile away, something hung motionless in the air, above a cut field, near an old, half-collapsed barn with a rusted roof, a place I'd passed countless times before. This thing was low, maybe 50 feet off the ground, or less, and it was big. At first, it just looked like a dark mass blocking out the stars. No light, no sound, just a black void in the sky. As I got closer, the shape became clearer. It was a triangle, like a long, flat wedge with soft, rounded corners. Huge. It stretched almost across the entire field. It wasn't perfectly still. Instead, it drifted slowly, balanced on air, not wobbling, but moving deliberately like a blimp, only smoother. 3 small, dull red lights marked its underside, one near each point. They weren't blinking or glowing, just present like standby LEDs on electronics. I pulled over and rolled down my window, expecting to hear something, a hum, a sound. But there was nothing. Absolute silence. No crickets, no wind, not even engine noise from my car. The air itself seemed to have stopped moving. I sat watching for 2 or 3 minutes. I didn't take out my phone. I wasn't scared, but I was acutely aware of how alone I was. Eventually, the object began to rise very slowly, not rotating or tilting, just lifting straight out while remaining perfectly level. It went higher until it disappeared against the night sky, those red dots unchanged. It simply faded upward and vanished. After waiting another minute, I drove home to my house in a small cul-de-sac outside Westport. I didn't tell anyone about what I'd seen. I just microwaved some leftover mac and cheese, showered, and went to bed around 2 a.m. I didn't sleep much, not from fear, but because my mind was racing. Unable to settle down. The garbage truck's early arrival always sets my dog off, so I got up, fed her, and made coffee. That's when I noticed the black sedan in the driveway. No license plates, tinted windows, engine off. 2 men in dark suits stood outside, one near the front steps, the other by the car. No visible badges. When I cracked the door open, the man closest to the house gave a polite, controlled smile and said he just had a few quick questions. He just had a few quick questions. I stepped onto the porch. Without introducing himself, he asked if I'd been on County Road 700E the previous night near the collapsed barn. I confirmed I had been, driving home from work. Then came the pointed question, "Did you see anything unusual while driving?" I hesitated. Something about his steady gaze felt like he was carefully studying my reaction. I finally mentioned seeing some weird lights in the sky. The second man, still by the car, called over with a surprisingly neutral tone. "Do you often imagine things at night?" It didn't sound mocking, more like a genuinely curious inquiry. I firmly responded that I was awake, driving and certain about what I'd seen. They seemed satisfied. Before leaving, the first man asked about outdoor cameras. I said no. They thanked me, got in their car, and backed out of the driveway, driving straight out of the neighborhood without stopping elsewhere. Later that day, something strange caught my eye. My mailbox. Part of a group box for the block had an odd smear, like oil or ash. Only my box. I wiped it with a paper towel, leaving a greasy gray streak. That night, my dog's behavior turned odd. She refused to go into the backyard, standing at the door and whining. When I opened it, she backed away. I walked her out front instead. She kept looking upward, watching the sky silently. Weeks have passed. I haven't seen anything else. But now I always take a different route home from work. I was flying my drone that afternoon over the eastern edge of the Yuma proving ground. I always stay clear of the restricted zone. This isn't about causing trouble. I'd parked on a gravel pull-off just off Highway 95, a spot popular with sky watchers. Flat desert, stretched in every direction, nothing but low scrub and distant mountains. I launched from my truck's bed around 4:20 p.m. The weather was perfect. Hot, dry, cloudless with total visibility. My DJI Mavic 3 Pro has an excellent camera. The plan was simple: film a sunset time-lapse and play with some new editing software. I'd brought a cooler, headphones, and a book, expecting to stay until after dark. The first 30 minutes were totally normal. I was capturing great shots facing west golden light over sand, long shadows stretching across the landscape. While panning the camera north, something caught my eye. A quick zip through the frame. Just a blur. I reversed the footage, studied it frame by frame. It moved across maybe 2 frames. About 1/10 of a second. Initially, I thought it might be a bird. But slowing the clip down revealed something odd. No wings. No recognizable shape. Just a metallic flash like sunlight on chrome. Its movement was unnatural. Straight and impossibly fast. Not the curve of a bird's flight, but something mechanical and precise. I adjusted the gimbal and started scanning. Seconds later, it happened again. This time I saw it clearly. A thin, dark shape moving across the sky. Too fast for a plane. Completely silent. I hit record, watching it make multiple passes at different angles, almost like it was circling or scanning an area. It didn't look manned or even constructed. Just a shape, maybe 10 or 15 feet long. No wings, no lights, no contrail. It would appear suddenly, shoot past in a straight line, then simply vanish. Not fade out or shrink in the distance, just gone. When I turned the drone higher for a top-down view, something strange occurred. The signal cut out instantly, not dropped, but completely severed. The video feed glitched and went black. The controller reported signal loss, yet the drone remained in visual line of sight. This wasn't normal. I tried the return to home button. Nothing happened. Then the controller powered down completely. The battery still showed 74%. I looked up, and the drone was gone. The tailgate, scanning the horizon. Nothing. Gone. No crash. I would have heard it. I just stood there a long time, not even packing up right away. Something felt off. I felt watched, like I wasn't alone out here anymore, even though I couldn't see anything. I kept expecting headlights to crest the ridge or a low hum to start from somewhere, but the desert stayed quiet. By the time I left, the sun was down. I got home around 8:45. My place is a small house on the edge of Yuma, with a fenced yard. I backed into the driveway and sat with the engine running for a bit. I don't usually get spooked, but something about the silence stuck with me, like something had stopped watching me, but only for a little while. Around 10:30, someone knocked on my door. Not the bell, but 3 slow knocks. My porch lights had been busted for months, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I grabbed a flashlight and looked through the peephole. Nothing, just darkness. I opened the door a few inches. A man stood there. Black suit, plain black tie, white shirt, no jacket. His shoes were oddly clean, which made no sense given my gravel walkway. His hair was slicked back. Average looking, could have been 35, could have been 55. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Let's keep it that way. He didn't introduce himself, didn't ask for anything. Just stood there, waiting for me to nod or agree. I didn't move. One hand on the door, the other on the unlit flashlight. He didn't blink. Then he turned and walked down the steps, disappearing from my porch window. I waited. No car started, no tail lights, just silence. I didn't sleep much that night. Lights stayed on in the living room. I kept checking the street every 10 minutes. Next morning, I went out to my truck. The drone was gone. It had been in a locked, hard case under the tunnel cover. No signs of forced entry. The case was still there, zipped up. But when I opened it, empty, just the molded foam insert sitting there. Controller gone too. I searched everywhere. The garage, my office. Checked in case I'd brought it inside and forgotten, but I hadn't. I always lock it up. Always. I'd pulled up the Ring doorbell footage, hoping to catch something. It had frozen at 3:12 a.m. before resuming. No. I headed to Ridge Hollow Campground solo in mid-October. No emails, no phone, just trees and quiet. Most leaves had already fallen, and nights were cold, low 40s, but I had gear for that. I'd camped here years ago with friends, but this trip was different. The first night was quiet, no other cars, no distant fires, just wind through bare trees and occasional owl calls. I parked at Site 12, hiked my pack a few hundred yards, and set up tent before sundown. Ramen on my camp stove, a paperback by headlamp, then sleep around 10. Sometime midnight, I needed to pee. The tent was cold, and I hesitated to unzip. Eventually, I gave in. The fire was out, just a few glowing charcoal chunks left. I stepped into my boots, took care of business, and returned to the tent. Nothing felt strange then. Morning changed everything. At 6:12 a.m., with the sun barely up, I unzipped the tent and saw something odd. The fire pit's rocks, which had formed a simple ring the night before, were now arranged in a perfect circle. Not just a rough attempt, but mathematically precise. Uniform gaps, equal spacing, like someone had used a compass. I stared, trying to rationalize it. Did I move the rocks and forget? But I knew I hadn't touched them. My little folding stove sat inside the original ring. I took a single photo, almost unconsciously. Then I boiled water, made coffee, and sat trying not to overthink it. A 3:45 incident with my drone came to mind. Something weird. In the desert, a man in a suit telling me to forget it. I'd stopped flying after that. Now this perfect circle felt connected somehow, though I couldn't explain why. Around noon, I set out on a familiar hike along the red-blazed trail. This was a route I knew well, about 5 miles round trip, nothing too challenging. The trail wound past rocky outcrops and climbed to a ridge with a decent view. Roughly 30 minutes, and everything changed. A man stood just off the trail, not walking, just waiting. His outfit was precise. Black pants, black jacket, the kind of clean uniform you might see on security personnel. His movements were deliberate as he stepped onto the trail. "You camping alone?" he asked, his voice low and flat. I confirmed I was at Site 12. Then he requested to see my camera. Something felt odd. I hadn't mentioned the Canon point and shoot to anyone, not even in the ranger station's logbook. When he repeated his request, I found myself inexplicably complying, unzipping my pack and handing it over. He didn't even browse the photos. Just held the camera, turned it once, and returned it. "Please don't take pictures of the fire rings," he said. Then, as quickly as he'd appeared, he vanished into the trees, not walking away, simply disappearing. I stood there, bewildered. The encounter left me unsettled enough that I didn't want to pass that spot again soon. I finished the hike without taking more photographs. Back at camp that evening, I reviewed my photos. One circle was initially clear, but an hour later, the thumbnail was completely black. Tapped it. File corrupted. Every other image remained intact. Sleep was difficult that night. No unusual noises or people disturbed me, but I kept waking, convinced I heard fading footsteps outside the tent. The next morning, the rocks around my campsite had been mysteriously rearranged. Not kicked or tossed, but laid out in a strange curving arc away from the fire pit. I left them untouched. Since that day, I haven't camped alone again. It was mid-September, with nights just starting to cool down. I'd taken a week off work to visit my cousin's place. No, I was out fishing on Lake Vermilion in Minnesota, using my uncle's simple fishing cabin. It was just a small, one-room shack with a wood stove and a modest dock. No technology, no connections. Exactly what I wanted. Tuesday afternoon, I took the old aluminum boat out. A 6-pack and some tackle were my companions as I slowly rolled across the water, catching and releasing a few small walleye. By nightfall, the lake was completely still. I cut the motor and let the boat drift, hearing nothing but water, gently tapping against the hull. Sometime around 10:30, a strange glow appeared in the lake's center. Initially, I thought it was another boat, maybe someone with a lantern or a big LED setup. But this wasn't moving like a boat. Instead, it hovered about 40 or 50 feet above the water, just suspended there. A round, pulsing white light with no beam, no flicker, no sound, just a slow, rhythmic dimming and brightening. I turned off my headlamp and watched. Completely motionless. My watch read 10:41, and I kept checking because time seemed to slip away. Suddenly, the light shifted from white to a pale orange. Not gradually, but instantly, like a switch had been flipped. Still, no sound. I wanted to record it, but my phone was charging back in the cabin. So I sat frozen, watching. Maybe 10 minutes passed before the light vanished, not flying away, but simply disappearing between one blink and the next. I remained on the water for another half hour, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Was it a drone? Some light trick? But nothing added up. No noise, no navigation lights, nothing consistent with a low-flying object. Returning to the cabin, I locked the door, something I never usually do out here, and collapsed on the cot, boots still on. I might have slept 3 hours. By 7 the next morning, I was on the dock with coffee. Thick fog had rolled in, obscuring everything beyond the first tree line. Around 8, a black SUV approached down the gravel path. I heard its tires crunching before I saw 2 men in black suits. No ties emerged. One was tall and thin, the other broader and in his late 50s. Without introductions, the older man directly asked if I'd experienced anything unusual on the lake the previous night. I chuckled and asked, "Like what?" He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "No, I'm Paul Donovan, 32. It all happened last fall during a work trip through northern Arizona. I was driving back from a client meeting in Flagstaff late one evening, just me and the road. I left around 8 p.m., planning to spend the night in a motel near Winslow before heading home the next morning. The drive should have taken about 2 hours. The weather was clear but cold, the sky full of stars. I don't usually drive that late, but it was the only way to fit the trip in. I was on Route 66 for a while, then switched to a smaller highway cutting through the desert and forest patches. I remember being tired, but not sleepy. Just that calm exhaustion after a long day. What I don't remember is what happened after that. I woke up the next morning in my car, windows fogged up, parked on the shoulder of a dusty dirt road. Later, I found myself at a lake. Some guys approached me, an older man and another who didn't speak. They asked about my boat and depth finder. I told them it was just an old basic sonar unit. They inquired if I'd logged anything strange the night before or noticed any radio or phone interference. I said I didn't have service and hadn't logged anything. The first older guy seemed tired, almost like he was passing on advice he'd received. He suggested I fish elsewhere. They walked back to their SUV, which had no license plates, and drove off. When I later checked my depth finder's SD card, it was gone. Not removed, but completely vanished, with the locked latch untouched. That night, I packed up and drove back to Duluth. Even though I'd planned to stay through the weekend, something felt off. I wasn't scared exactly, just felt like I wasn't supposed to be there. I haven't been back to that lake since. I'm still trying to make sense of it all. How it happened exactly, I can't explain. The early morning hours found me on an unfamiliar road, surrounded by scrub brush and low hills. No street lights, tow signs. My phone showed no signal, and the dashboard clock read 5:47 a.m., which made little sense. My last clear memory was stopping for gas near Flagstaff around 10:30 p.m., supposedly just 2 hours earlier. Yet here I was, with no recollection of the intervening time. No blurry memories, no scenes of driving, nothing. The car appeared untouched. No dents, no scratches. The cold, dry air emphasized my solitude as I sat trying to understand what had happened. The gas gauge showed half full, though I couldn't remember refueling after Flagstaff. Stepping out, I breathed in the desert sage and cold earth scent. Absolute silence surrounded me, interrupted only by a faint wind. No animals, no vehicles, just complete stillness. Deciding to find my way back to a main road, I grabbed my jacket and started walking. After about a mile, I hit a paved road and followed it east. A motel sign for Desert Pines Lodge soon appeared, revealing I was only 10 miles from Winslow, but in the opposite direction from where I expected. My phone remained without service. The motel office was quiet, staffed by a woman who seemed to have been there all night. When I asked if anyone had called for me or if my car had been noted anywhere, she simply shook her head. "No one's been around since last night," she said. I rented a room, feeling something was fundamentally wrong, as if the last few hours had been completely erased. Around 9 a.m., still half awake, a knock startled me. Through the peephole, I saw a man in a black suit and tie, wearing a long black coat. His hair was neatly combed, his face expressionless. "You're back early," he said. Frozen, I asked who he was, but he offered no response. As I cracked the door open, he suddenly stepped back and vanished. No sound of a door, no footsteps, no car driving away. Just gone. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, wondering if I was dreaming or experiencing some strange trick of light. I was out in the backyard one night taking pictures of the stars like I usually do. I'm not some big astronomer, just a hobbyist with a decent camera and a cheap tripod. My name's Clara. I live in a small town in northern Vermont, and this was about a year ago, late September. The air was cool, but still had that hint of summer hanging around. I had set up near the edge of my property, where the trees thin out, and the sky opens wide. It was just past 10 p.m., no moon, really clear night, perfect for star photos. I'd been snapping shots for maybe an hour, focusing on the usual stuff, the Big Dipper, Cassiopeia, that kind of thing. At some point I noticed this one star up in the east that wasn't like the others. It was blinking, but not like a plane or a satellite. The blink was slow and rhythmic, almost like a signal. On, off, pause, on, off, pause. It caught my attention because none of the other stars were blinking at all. And this wasn't the kind of flicker caused by atmospheric distortion or clouds. I watched it for a while, trying to figure out if it was just some weird optical illusion or maybe a drone with a light. But it stayed perfectly still, and the blinking kept the same rhythm for at least 15 minutes. Then slowly it started to descend. I didn't just drop suddenly or streak across the sky like a meteor. It moved downward really slowly, like it was drifting or lowering itself behind the trees. That part got me weirded out. I sat down on the bed. My heart was pounding. I didn't tell anyone about the man. Not right away. Who would believe it? But the whole day, I kept checking outside, half expecting him to come back. I called my office later that afternoon and told them about the trip and how I'd lost time on the road. They said the client had seen me leave at 8 p.m., but no one had any idea where I was after that. My car was fine and nothing seemed stolen or damaged. When I got home a few days later, I checked the GPS history on my phone. I showed the route from Flagstaff toward Winslow, but with a big gap between 10:30 p.m. and 5:30 a.m. and a weird detour on back roads I didn't remember taking. I asked a mechanic to check my car. They said everything worked fine. No problems with brakes, steering, or engine. I still don't know what happened that night or where I was for those missing hours. And I can't explain the man in black that every time I'm driving late, especially on quiet back roads, I find myself looking over my shoulder just in case. The night sky can hide strange things. I spotted something unusual and kept my camera pointed up, capturing a few shots. The blinking light grew larger as I approached the treetops, then vanished behind them. I waited another half hour, hoping it would return, but nothing happened. When I told Maggie about my experience the next day, she teased me, suggesting it was just an airplane or satellite, but I knew what I saw. For the next week, I scanned the sky each night around the same time, yet it never reappeared. About 6 days later, I found myself in the town library's quiet reading nook, surrounded by astronomy books. The space was so still you could almost hear dust settling. While flipping through a constellation book, a man suddenly sat across from me. He arrived silently, dressed in a black jacket and jeans, looking like a clean-cut guy in his late 30s. Without breaking eye contact, he asked, "Are you still watching the sky?" Startled, I simply nodded. His brief smile felt more like a confirmation than a friendly gesture. "You should be careful what you look for," he warned. "Some things aren't meant to be found." Before I could question him, he placed a small card on the table and walked away. The card bore a name, cross, and an unfamiliar phone number with no organizational affiliation. Something made me hesitate to call, so I pocketed the card and left. That night I returned to my backyard, more prepared and waiting. But the sky displayed only regular, motionless stars. Then strange occurrences began. My phone lost signal in unexpected places, even at home. My camera's battery drained unusually quickly. An persistent feeling of being watched followed me, not paranoid, but a quiet, constant awareness. One evening, walking home from the grocery store, I noticed a car passing me twice. What caught my attention was its lack of a license plate and the driver's obscured face. Something felt off, connecting to my earlier skywatching experience. The dark inside. When I stopped, I caught the driver glancing directly at me. My pace quickened, and I darted inside without looking back. I shared everything with Maggie, the car, the guy at the library, the blinking star. Her advice was to report it to the police, but I knew that would only make me sound crazy. What could they do? Some guy in a black jacket said strange things, and a blinking light moved behind the trees. It sounded completely ridiculous. One warm evening, I left the back door slightly open while inside. This wasn't typical for me, but the temperature felt comfortable. While editing photos, a low humming noise caught my attention, like a distant engine, but smoother and quieter. It lasted around 20 seconds before fading away. I stepped outside and looked up. The sky was empty. No blinking light. No strange shapes. The next morning, my camera had vanished from the kitchen table where I'd left it. The back door was closed, its lock seemingly untouched. The camera was never found. After that, nighttime became something I avoided. Evenings were spent indoors, trying to push the memories away. Yet thoughts persisted: the blinking star, the slow descent, the library encounter. Sometimes, when the wind is just right, I swear I hear that low hum again. I was out in the middle of nowhere, tracking a story about strange crop damage near La Mesa, Texas. As Sarah Donovan, a journalist who spends too much time on rural mysteries and local oddities, this assignment seemed familiar. Farmers had reported unusual patterns in their cornfield, with no clear explanation. My expectations were simple, probably pest damage or weather-related issues, but I wanted to investigate personally. The day was typically hot, an early summer afternoon with bright skies, wispy clouds, and an air thick with dry grass and dust. My old pickup navigated the dirt road until reaching the field's edge. The corn looked healthy, except for one peculiar 50-foot patch where stalks were flattened, bent in unnatural directions. This didn't resemble typical wind or rain damage. It looked almost intentional, as if someone had methodically pushed the plants down. I spent hours photographing the area from various angles, capturing close-ups of stalks and ground. The soil appeared hard and cracked in places. A faint, almost metallic smell lingered in the air, which I briefly noticed but dismissed. He kept repeating one phrase, "It's not normal." I was back in my motel room that night, reviewing pictures and notes when my phone rang. It was one of those strange calls where a number showed up, but silence greeted me. Static and faint clicking sounds filled the line. What caught my attention was a subtle breathing, slow and deliberate. Not heavy or ragged, just present alongside the clicks. I listened for 2 minutes holding the phone close, but nothing more happened. When I tried calling back, it went straight to voicemail. I dismissed it as a prank possibly related to my story, but the memory of that breathing lingered. The next morning, I told Jim about the call. His response was unsettling. "You're not the only one. Some of us have been getting those calls lately. No one talks, just that noise." People say it's nothing, but it feels like something as I drove back toward town that afternoon. An uneasy feeling of being watched settled over me. It was subtle, like a weight on my chest. I kept checking my rearview mirror, expecting to see someone following me, but the road behind me remained empty. Evening came as I unloaded my things at my apartment in La Mesa. Just before dark, with the sky a dull orange from sunset, someone knocked. I opened the door to find a man dressed entirely in black, from his jacket and pants to a cap pulled low over his eyes. He looked like someone who wanted to remain unnoticed. He stood silent at first, just staring. Then, very quietly, he said, "Stories can disappear too." Before I could respond, he turned and walked away. When I looked through the peephole moments later, he had vanished. No car, no footprints, nothing. After that night, my phone continued ringing with the same eerie silence, clicks, and breathing. I stopped answering. Trying to continue my work became difficult as the crop damage story seemed to slip away. My notes became strange. Details I was certain I'd written appeared altered. Photos looked different, with shadows or shapes I didn't recall. I mentioned the calls and the mysterious man to a few people, but no one else had experienced anything similar. Something was happening, but I can't quite explain it. Something was off that night, but I can't quite explain it. For a while, I was caught in an experience that felt out of place, something I didn't want to discuss. It happened on a late summer evening in northern Michigan, with the 4 of us, me, my wife Lisa, and our kids, Abby and Max, gathered in the backyard. The air was cool, but not cold, and the sky was so clear you could see countless stars if you looked up. We were sitting around a small fire pit roasting marshmallows and chatting casually. Max was trying to convince Abby that his flashlight could cut through anything, just typical kid talk. The yard was illuminated by the fire and some old string lights Lisa had hung along the deck railing. Suddenly, Abby went quiet and pointed toward the woods at the edge of our property. When I followed her gaze, 3 perfect circles of light were drifting slowly across the yard. They were about the size of basketballs, glowing with a soft, almost oily white light. Not like bulbs or flashlights, but more like light without a source, just hanging in the air. They moved smoothly, side by side, around 2 or 3 feet above the grass. No sound, no flickering. Lisa and I exchanged a look. "Do you see that?" she asked. Max stood wide-eyed next to Abby. I tried to stay calm, but honestly, I didn't know what to say. To take a picture. But when I unlocked it and pointed it toward the lights, the screen went completely black. No camera, No flashlight, nothing worked, as if the phone was dead, though it wasn't. We watched these lights drift slowly toward the tree line and then vanish behind the pines, leaving no trace, no sound, no rustling branches. We all just stood there for a minute silent. The fire crackled. Max finally broke the silence. What was that? I didn't answer. Later that night, I kept checking the yard from the kitchen window, but nothing else appeared. The night returned to normal. Cricket sounds, an occasional owl, hoot. The next morning, Lisa noticed something strange. Mr. Garrison was talking with a man wearing a black jacket and pants, seemingly trying to blend into the morning fog. There was something off about our neighborhood lately. Lisa had noticed a strange man in black who visited Mr. Garrison briefly one day, standing close and speaking quietly before leaving in a dark sedan. When I tried to ask Mr. Garrison about it, he simply blinked and claimed he hadn't talked to anyone. Something else was weird too. Our usually locked mailbox had been opened, and inside was an unusual black folder, thin, slick, and completely empty. What struck me as strange was how warm it felt, like it had been sitting in direct sunlight, even though it was a cool early morning. I placed the folder on the kitchen table, but it didn't cool down for hours. That night, the kids were restless, and Lisa kept glancing out the windows nervously. The tension was palpable. Over the next few days, everything seemed normal, but we all felt watched. That unsettling sensation of not being alone, yet unable to pinpoint who else might be present. I started hearing faint, odd noises. Sometimes a soft humming just outside the window. Other times seeming to come from inside the walls, not loud enough to be certain, but enough to make me pause and listen carefully. Then one morning, the black folder simply vanished. No trace, no explanation. I asked the neighbors if they'd seen anything unusual, but no one had. Mr. Garrison remained distant, his eyes darting away whenever I looked his way. We didn't see those mysterious lights again, but the feeling of being observed never truly disappeared. My life continued, but occasionally when I'm alone outside, I catch a fleeting glimpse of something just beyond the yard's edge. A flash of white light, a shifting shape between trees. Each time I'm left wondering, is someone still watching? Later, out on the dock of my small cabin at Lake Crescent in Washington, just after sunset, I was capturing the evening light. The sky had cleared after a light rain, and the air was rich with wet pine and earthy scents. I was using my phone, making short nature clips. Nothing fancy, just quiet moments for myself. That night, something unusual caught my attention. At first, they were just tiny pinpricks of light hovering over the lake's distant shore, near some steep hills. I was at the lake, standing quietly on the dock, when I first noticed something strange. Soft blue and white lights seemed to drift slowly across the water, not following any clear pattern. I used my phone camera to zoom in, trying to get a better look. One of these lights blinked off and then reappeared a few seconds later, now positioned a bit higher and closer to the shore. The lake was silent, except for the occasional fish splash and the faint whisper of wind through trees. That's when I saw the figure standing completely still at the far edge of the dock. No sound had announced its arrival, no footsteps, no voices. This person was dressed entirely in black, not just dark clothing, but something that seemed purposefully designed to blend into the night. No hat, no reflective surfaces, just pure black. At first, I thought it might be someone fishing or wandering, but something felt off. The figure didn't move or shift its weight at all. I called out, "Hey, are you okay?" No response came. I tried again, a little louder. "Hello, do you need help?" Then something truly unsettling happened. The figure slowly turned its head toward me, not naturally, but almost mechanically. Then it started moving sideways along the shoreline, gliding smoothly while maintaining eye contact. Suddenly, it moved behind a cluster of trees, and completely vanished. No sound, no broken branches, nothing. By the time I lowered my phone, the mysterious lights across the lake had disappeared as if they'd never existed. I wasn't sure if I'd imagined the entire encounter or if it was real. Back in the cabin, I checked the door locks twice. My phone had no signal, which wasn't unusual in this remote area, but the night felt heavy, as if something was watching from the dark woods surrounding me. The next morning, I went to Port Angeles for coffee. When I returned, around noon, a black sedan was parked by the roadside near my cabin. I was certain it hadn't been there the night before. The car was immaculately clean, with no visible license plate, and the windows were tinted so darkly that I couldn't see inside. No one was around. The road near my cabin is a dead end and rarely used, especially during the week. As I approached the car slowly, uncertain what to expect, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something didn't feel right, and I drove through the Mojave Desert just after sunset with my wife Karen, heading back to Los Angeles from a weekend in Vegas. The sky was warm orange fading into purple, while the desert quickly cooled. It was one of those quiet drives where the radio plays softly and miles roll by effortlessly. Karen was fiddling with the radio, flipping through stations, when I noticed something strange out the window. A soft white light hovered just above a low ridge near the highway. It looked like a headlamp or flare, but wasn't attached to any vehicle. The light rose slowly, hung steady, then blinked out as if someone had flipped a switch. Simultaneously, the radio went dead. Static filled the car, growing louder until Karen turned it off completely. We exchanged a look. She'd seen it too, her eyes wide. Behind us, the road remained clear. No other cars, no flashing lights. Just us and an eerie silence. We continued driving, the desert darkening around us. At a small rest stop ahead, we paused to collect ourselves. Weeks later, I found myself at a cabin haunted by a different, unsettling experience. Movement flickered behind tinted windows, but when I stopped to look, nothing was there. I checked the driveway and surrounding area. No footprints, no other vehicles. A sedan remained parked there all day. I considered calling the police, but thought they'd dismiss me as a local or lost traveler. Instead, I stayed inside with locked windows, watching the woods. Something felt present just beyond my sight. By evening, the car had vanished like the mysterious figure from that night. I've returned to the cabin several times since, but never encountered anything similar. No lights, no figures. Yet the memory persists. How quiet everything was, how that shadowy figure watched silently before disappearing without a sound. We pulled into a rest stop with gas pumps and a tiny store. The engine died, and an unusual silence settled around us. Something felt off. The air seemed thicker, heavier. Not peaceful, just empty. Karen and I stepped out, stretching our legs. We both scanned the area, an unconscious habit that suggested we expected something or someone might be hiding in the shadows. Near the payphones at the parking lot's edge, a man stood perfectly still. He wore a plain black suit. Nothing remarkable. His hair was slicked back, and in the dim light, his face remained unreadable. What caught my attention wasn't his appearance, but his behavior. He wasn't on a phone. Instead, his lips moved silently, mouthing a single word. Back. I looked away briefly, then returned my gaze. He was still there watching us. Karen noticed him too, giving me a quick, knowing nod that seemed to ask, "Do you see that?" We got back in the car without conversation, locking the doors. As I backed out, I glanced again. The man remained motionless, rooted to his spot. We drove on, the car silence now more oppressive than before. The radio had been dead, but suddenly came back to life after about 10 miles. Static faded, and stations returned to normal. I tried changing channels, but everything worked fine now. We didn't talk much for the rest of the drive. Karen kept checking the rearview mirror, and I watched the side mirrors, half expecting to see the man following us, or that strange light rising behind a distant hill. By the time we reached the city limits, night had fully settled. The weird feeling seemed like a bubble about to burst, and we were both relieved to leave that empty desert stretch behind. At home, I checked the news. No power outages, no missing persons, nothing unusual. Yet sometimes when I'm driving late or sitting on the porch, I think about that light and the man mouthing back at the rest stop. I don't know what it meant. Maybe it was nothing, but it stayed with me. That quiet, watching feeling. I don't discuss it, not even with Karen. Some experiences you just keep to yourself. It was early October, and I was hiking alone on the Pine Ridge Trail in northern Vermont. Cool, crisp air hung with a light fog between the trees, the kind of morning that makes everything feel hushed, as if the forest was holding its breath. I'd left the trailhead around 7 a.m., hoping to cover some miles before the sun climbed too high. I'd hiked this trail before, but something felt different this time. I was about 2 miles into the hike when something felt off. The forest was unusually quiet. No birds, no rustling animals, just the crunch of leaves beneath my boots. At first, I thought the sounds behind me were just my own footsteps, echoing or branches snapping. But then something changed. A faint mechanical clicking started, like tiny gears turning or metal tapping. It wasn't natural. I stopped and turned around several times, but the trail was empty, surrounded by thick trees. The clicking continued, never right behind me, but always close, an irregular tapping just out of sight. I scanned the underbrush for any sign of wildlife, but nothing moved. No birds, no squirrels. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was probably a loose part on my pack or a falling rock. When I checked my gear, everything was secure. No loose straps could explain the noise. I even dropped my pack and stood still, listening. The clicking paused briefly, then resumed. Faint, but distinctly mechanical. The morning fog began lifting as sunlight broke through the trees, yet the sound persisted. A weird pressure emerged, like something was watching me, always just out of reach. The trail seemed to stretch longer, the woods growing denser. I wanted to turn back but didn't want to admit I was scared. By noon, I finally reached the parking lot, which was filling with cars. Near the entrance, I spotted my old Subaru. That's when I saw him. A man stood right by my car, wearing a black suit, neat, pressed, without a tie. His hair was slicked back, his face expressionless, as if not really seeing anything. He wasn't on his phone or doing anything specific, just brushing non-existent dust from his shoulders. I approached cautiously. "Hi," I said. He looked at me slowly and nodded. "That sound you heard," he said calmly. "It isn't for you." His low voice made me shiver, not from cold. Before I could ask what he meant, he turned and walked into the trees, disappearing into the fog like he was never there. I stood stunned, wondering if I'd imagined the entire encounter. Driving home, the experience kept replaying in my mind, leaving me unsettled and confused. Nora was camping alone out near the Sawtooth Mountains in Idaho, trying to get away from everything for a few days. Just me, a small tent, and a couple of books. It was late September, and the nights were already chilly, but the days were still warm enough to sit outside and watch the sunset without a jacket. On the second evening, I was sitting by the fire, just after twilight, watching the sky darken and the stars start to come out. I'd already eaten and was about to pack up the fire when something beyond the ridge caught my attention. A soft glowing orb, maybe the size of a basketball, hovered just above the ground. It wasn't blinking like a plane or helicopter, and its movement was unlike anything I'd seen before. The pale blue-white light drifted slowly, almost floating without a clear direction. It didn't cast shadows, and I kept watching, thinking it might be a drone or a lost lantern. Then the light started moving toward the ridge, first slowly, then faster, gliding silently before disappearing behind the trees. No sound broke the forest's quiet. As I walked back to my tent, I noticed a black sedan parked about 50 yards away. No logos, no decals, just a clean, dark car sitting on the edge of the clearing. Its headlights were off, but the engine idled, exhaust visible in the cold air. And the nearest road was at least a mile away. Something kept me silent. The driver's door opened. A man in a dark, fully buttoned suit with a white shirt and thin black tie stepped out. His hair was neat, his face expressionless. When he approached and stood about 10 feet away, he looked directly at me. "Some things aren't meant to be found," he said without any introduction. Later, when I reached a stoplight or was alone in a quiet spot, I thought about the clicking, the man in those woods. I never heard the sound again. I didn't see the man in black anywhere else. I don't know why that clicking was there or who that guy was. I guess some parts of the trail aren't meant for us, even if we think they are. I was driving through the Mojave Desert late one night, heading back to LA after visiting a friend in Nevada. Solo trips like these make the road feel endless, with the radio eventually fading out as you get far from any city. It was summer, but the air outside was dry and cool, the sky pitch black, except for stars. Around midnight, about 50 miles from the nearest town, I noticed a faint glow off to the right above the desert floor, just below the stars. At first, I thought it might be a flare or campfire, but it didn't flicker like a flame. Instead, it was a hovering light, round and steady, maybe the size of a basketball. It glowed with a soft white light that pulsed slowly, almost like it was breathing. I pulled over to the shoulder, curious but cautious. The desert was silent except for my engine cooling down. When I stepped out and looked toward the light, I saw it hovering maybe 20 feet off the ground, not moving much, just gently pulsing. There was no sound, no wind, no bugs, just that orb of light. I wanted a better look, but didn't want to get too close, so I stayed near the car, shining my flashlight in its direction. The light from the orb seemed to dim and brighten in response, like it was aware of me. I felt a weird chill, even though it wasn't cold. Suddenly, a man appeared near the car, walking toward me from the darkness. He wore a black suit, perfectly pressed, with a white shirt underneath and no tie. His shoes made no sound on the gravel. I hadn't seen him approach and didn't hear any footsteps. He was just suddenly there. He stopped about 10 feet from me, hands at his sides, eyes locked on mine. His face was pale, expressionless, but somehow serious. He meant to say something, but nothing came out. He nodded once, then walked back to his car, got in, and drove off slowly, his tail lights fading into the trees. I stayed there for a long time after he left, watching the place where he disappeared. The forest was still quiet, but the feeling of being watched lingered. I wasn't sure if I should stay or leave, but I chose to spend the night. Nothing else happened, and in the morning, the clearing looked normal. No footprints besides mine, no sign the car had been there. I'd packed up and left that day, driving out through the winding mountain roads, thinking about the light, the man, and that strange warning. I don't know what I saw or who that guy was, but something about it all stayed with me on the drive home. The desert around us was still, no breeze, no sound except for our breathing. I was hiking in the Adirondacks one early fall afternoon, trying to squeeze in a day on the trail before the weather turned colder. I'd chosen a spot called Panther Gorge, not because it was popular, but because it was supposed to be quiet, a little remote, and mostly untouched. I'd been hiking alone for a few hours. The sky was partly cloudy with that low gray light that makes everything feel a bit muted. About halfway through the loop, I came to a narrow stretch of woods where the trees thickened and the path narrowed to barely more than a dirt track. The usual sounds of birds or wind in the leaves were gone. Dead silence. It was strange enough to make me stop and listen. But then there was a flash like a camera or a lightning bug, but brighter just for a second. The light came from just off the trail, deeper in the woods. I squinted into the shadows but saw nothing. I kept moving, but the silence stuck with me. No crunching leaves underfoot, no birds calling. It was the kind of quiet that makes you hyper-aware of every little sound, and every time I thought I heard something, it vanished. After about 10 minutes, the trail opened up again into a small clearing near the road that led back to the trailhead parking. Without saying a word, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. He handed it to me and said in a calm, quiet voice, "Forget what you saw. Keep driving." Then he turned around and walked back into the darkness, disappearing almost immediately into the night. The orb was gone too, like it had vanished the moment the man appeared. I stood there frozen for a moment, holding the paper. I unfolded it slowly, expecting maybe a note or a warning, but there was nothing written on it. Just a strange symbol, something like a circle with lines radiating unevenly from it. Kind of like a broken sun or a cracked compass. It wasn't a language I recognized. I got back in my car, still feeling off, and started driving. The road stretched out in front of me, empty and silent. I glanced at the paper again, but the symbol didn't change or glow or anything. Just a weird, crude drawing on plain paper. For the rest of the trip, I kept thinking about that man in the light. Who was he? Why did he want me to forget? And what did that symbol mean? I never saw the orb again, and I never saw the man in the suit. But sometimes when I'm driving alone at night, I look out into the desert and wonder if that quiet glow is still here somewhere watching. Suddenly, a black sedan caught my eye. It was parked on the roadside, engine running but lights off. A plain, older model without any distinguishing features. The driver sat inside, looking perfectly ordinary at first glance. Mid-40s, clean-shaven, with dark hair slicked back, dressed in a black suit and open-collared white shirt. His expression was calm, almost blank, but his gaze was fixed directly on me. As I slowed down, uncertain of the situation, he spoke. "You okay?" His voice low and clear. I mumbled something about finishing my hike, my words sounding strange in the still air. His response was cryptic. The forest keeps its secrets. Something in his tone suggested more than a casual warning. When I asked about the light or the silence, he simply shook his head. "Not everything is meant to be understood," he said. "Sometimes the best thing is to walk away." Before I could probe further, he closed the window, started the engine, and slowly pulled away. The car turned onto the road and vanished around a bend, leaving me standing there as the cold began to seep into my bones and the sun dipped lower. The wood silence stayed with me even after I reached my car. The nagging feeling persisted that what I'd encountered wasn't natural. That night, driving home, I couldn't shake thoughts of the man, the car, and the strange quiet. Nothing made sense, and oddly, part of me didn't want it to. It was just after midnight, driving south on Highway 89 between Flagstaff and Prescott. The highway stretched empty, the sky clear, A typical dry, cool desert night in July. Long haul, pushing to make good time. These desert roads can get eerie at night, but after 20 years of driving, I wasn't particularly on edge. Around 1:30 a.m., approaching a section of road cutting through a sparse pine forest, something unusual caught my attention. At first, it looked like a hovering helicopter or police chopper, its searchlight sweeping across the trees. The road was dead quiet, stretching ahead with a stark emptiness. Something caught my eye, a soft, glowing object hovering about 100 feet above the ground near the roadside. It wasn't a typical aircraft. Instead, the object was circular but with blurry edges, emitting a gentle white light that seemed to pulse almost like a heartbeat. No blinking signals, no harsh edges, just a calm, ethereal glow against the perfectly clear night sky. I pulled my truck onto the shoulder and killed the engine, wanting to capture this strange sight. My phone had other plans. When I tried to take a picture, the screen flickered weirdly and went black. Frustrated, I set the phone down and watched. Minutes passed, and the light began to fade slowly, as if someone were dimming a switch. Then, just as mysteriously as it appeared, it vanished completely. The silence was profound. No engine hum, no mechanical sounds, just the typical desert night noises, distant coyote calls. Wind rustling through trees. My heart raced a bit faster than usual, but I wasn't scared. More bewildered, really. Some weird light trick, I thought. Maybe a military test I didn't understand. Just as I was about to drive away, headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. An old black sedan pulled up quickly, stopping abruptly about 20 feet behind me. No visible plates. Tinted windows. Something felt off. The passenger window rolled down. A voice, calm but firm, spoke. "You didn't see anything," was confused. "What?" "Keep your eyes on the road," he repeated. Looking around, I saw only dark forest and an empty highway. My stomach tightened. "Who are you?" I asked. "No one you need to worry about," came the reply. His steady gaze revealed nothing. In an instant, the sedan peeled away, tires making almost no sound. It vanished into the night as if it had never existed. I checked the mirror. Nothing. Just desert and stars. Trying to shake off the strange encounter, I attempted to return to my driving, but something had fundamentally shifted. I was out in my backyard late one night, doing what I often do, trying to get a few decent shots of the night sky. I'm not a professional photographer, just someone who's always loved looking up, figuring out the constellations, playing around with my camera. The air was still cool but not cold, with a thin layer of fog settling in after a light rain earlier. Perfect for stargazing. Or so I thought. I'd set up near the edge of the yard, pointing my camera toward a cluster of stars I'd read about a few weeks back. While snapping away and adjusting focus and aperture, something weird caught my eye. One of the stars in that cluster blinked out, not like it faded gradually or got covered by a cloud. It just blinked like a light bulb switching off. I figured maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. So I kept watching. Then another star blinked out, and another right in sequence. Each went dark one after the other, almost like they were disappearing from the sky entirely. It was slow, almost like a pattern, but I couldn't tell what it meant, or if it meant anything at all. The whole cluster dimmed out until only one or two stars were left. I was frozen, staring, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. I looked around my yard for a moment. No planes, no drones, no flashes from neighbors, just the quiet night and the fading stars. Then, after a minute, the stars blinked back on exactly in reverse. Since that night, something's different. I've driven that highway hundreds of times before, but now it doesn't feel like just asphalt and dirt anymore. There's something watching, something waiting. I haven't been back out that way since, not alone. I kept glancing in the mirror, half expecting to see the black car again. The rest of the trip was uneventful, but I felt watched, like something was lingering just beyond sight. When I finally pulled into the truck stop in Prescott a few hours later, I checked my phone again. The pictures I tried to take were gone, not just missing from the camera roll. They'd been wiped clean, like the files were deleted at the source. I hadn't touched the phone since then. I told a couple of other drivers what I'd seen, but mostly got shrugged off or jokes. Maybe they think I'm making it up. Or maybe they just don't want to get involved. I still don't know what the light was or who that guy in the black car really was. The whole thing feels like one of those things you're not supposed to talk about, but it happened and it stuck with me. I went camping alone in the Cascade Mountains just a few weeks ago. I'd been hiking a lot that summer, mostly solo. The night sky caught my attention. Something felt different. Stars started behaving strangely, blinking in an odd, unnatural order, like they'd been switched off and then back on. The whole experience lasted maybe 5 minutes, but it felt much longer. My hands were shaking slightly as I took a few more photos before packing up and heading inside. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe an atmospheric glitch or something wrong with my eyes or camera. The next morning at the cafe where I work, a small local spot I've been at for years, 2 men in black suits caught my attention. They weren't typical customers. One wore sunglasses despite the dim, early morning light. They sat quietly in a corner, not ordering anything, barely moving, just watching me intently throughout my entire shift. When I approached and asked if they wanted coffee, the man without sunglasses gave a tight, faint smile and simply said, "Just keeping watch." No explanation. I nodded and returned to work, but felt increasingly uncomfortable. The walls seemed to close in as they continued their silent surveillance. At the end of my shift, they left without a word, almost disappearing like they were never there. I kept thinking about those blinking stars and the men who watched me so intently. Were they connected? Was I imagining things getting strange? Since then, I've avoided going outside at night to look at the stars. The sky feels different now, empty, like something's missing or watching back. I've reviewed my photos and videos dozens of times. The stars definitely blinked, but no one believes me. I haven't seen those men again, but occasionally when I'm at the cafe early, I catch a glimpse of a black suit in the window reflection, or feel an unsettling sense of being watched. I don't have answers, just a feeling that some things aren't meant to be seen, and some people ensure they stay that way. And I went on one of my usual camping trips looking to get away from work and the city's constant noise. This time, I chose a spot near a small lake, far from the main trail and any other campers. I never bothered checking in with the ranger station. That's just not my style. I prefer the quiet and isolation. As evening approached, I set up my tent just before sunset. The air felt soft and cool, holding on to the gentle warmth of late summer. After eating dinner, I settled into my sleeping bag, lying back with my headlamp off and watching faint stars peek through the pine branches. Around midnight, something woke me. At first, I thought it might be an animal, maybe a raccoon or deer. But these footsteps were different. They weren't random or hurried like an animal running. Instead, they were slow and deliberate, almost calculating. The steps seemed to circle my tent methodically, starting on the right side, moving to the back, then to the left, and back again. I remained completely still, listening. The footsteps were soft but distinct, almost like someone was pacing and watching, perhaps contemplating something. For about 20 minutes, I hoped whatever it was would simply leave, but the circling continued. Then suddenly, everything went silent. No wind, no wildlife sounds, just an oppressive quiet pressing against my tent walls. Eventually, the footsteps started again, moving even slower until they gradually faded into the trees. I couldn't fall back asleep, the tension lingering. The forest no longer felt comforting. The next morning, I packed up early and headed to the trailhead, deciding to check in with the ranger station just to confirm my safety. When I arrived, the station was empty except for a man in a black suit, definitely not typical ranger attire for a mountain location. He looked up and asked, "Are you Emily Parker?" I was stunned. I hadn't given my name to anyone and hadn't checked in anywhere. "Yeah," I responded cautiously. "Who's asking?" He smiled faintly. The mountains near Bend, Oregon on a late summer evening just after sunset. The sky was clear and a little chilly once the sun dropped, with a faint smell of pine and dry grass. I'd gone hiking earlier and decided to stick around until dark, hoping to catch some star shots or weird light reflections off the peaks. Around 9, while fiddling with my camera settings near a small clearing, I noticed something unusual. A cluster of lights far off on the ridge moved in a pattern I couldn't immediately understand. They weren't like airplane lights or the steady glow from a tower or campfire. Instead, they moved in a smooth, slow sequence, almost like a pulse or wave. I started recording, thinking it might be a drone formation or some weird signal reflection. The lights moved rhythmically left to right, up and down, but there was no sound, no other activity around them. I kept filming, trying to zoom in, but the distance made it hard to see details beyond the lights themselves. The pattern seemed too deliberate to be random. After maybe 10 minutes, I heard footsteps behind me. Turning quickly, I saw 2 men dressed in black suits, the kind you'd expect from government or security officials. But this was deep in the woods, miles from any road or building. Neither spoke at first, just stood watching me. One finally asked to see my footage in a calm voice. I hesitated, but handed over the camera. They crouched down, looking at the screen. The other man pulled out a phone and recorded the footage, seemingly cataloging it. When I asked who they were and what they wanted, he didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, "You should move on." Before I could ask what he meant, he stood up and walked inside the station. When I looked back, the chair he'd been sitting in was empty. I blinked and checked around the building, but there was no sign of him. The footsteps, the man in black, I didn't feel directly threatened, but something was definitely off. Something I can't explain. I left the mountains that day feeling watched, like the woods themselves were warning me to go. Since then, I haven't been back, and if I ever do, I'll probably check in first. The mountains and that ridge had haunted me ever since the night I couldn't explain. My camera held a story, but when I tried to show anyone, the files were gone, corrupted beyond recovery. No matter what tools I used, the footage vanished like a ghost. When I first encountered them, everything happened quickly. They looked at me, declared, "This is not your story to tell," and then disappeared into the trees, almost like shadows melting away. I was left standing alone, holding my camera, feeling a weight I couldn't describe. Trying to tell friends about what happened seemed impossible. Without evidence, my account sounded like a wild tale or just another story about mysterious lights in the distance. But the memory remained vivid and real. The men in black, their calm warning, those unexplained lights. Since that night, I've avoided the mountains after dark. Whenever I glance up at the sky near that ridge, I wonder if those lights will return. But deep down, I don't think I'm meant to understand. Then came another strange encounter. I woke up suddenly on a highway shoulder in northern Oregon, disoriented and confused. Highway traffic hummed around me, my head throbbing like I'd been struck. Bright sunlight cut through the windshield, and I realized I was in the driver's seat with no memory of how I'd arrived. The last clear moment I remembered was buying coffee at a gas station an hour earlier. Everything after that was a blank. My cracked phone was dead, offering no answers. When I tried the ignition, the car started smoothly. Just as I prepared to pull back onto the road, a pristine black sedan appeared behind me. Its windows were tinted so darkly that no hint of the interior was visible. The car looked brand new, as if it had just rolled off the showroom floor. The driver's window rolled down. A man in a black suit, likely in his late 30s or early 40s, leaned out, perfectly groomed. With a calm yet unreadable expression, he spoke softly. "Not yet," he said. "Excuse me," I responded, my throat dry. "You shouldn't be driving right now," he told me. And just like that, another inexplicable moment entered my growing collection of unanswered mysteries. Nye was parked on a quiet stretch of highway with no other cars nearby when something felt off. More than just a headache, I was stuck in a weird pause. The guy wasn't smiling, but there was something about the way he spoke that made me hesitate. "I need to get going," I said, trying to sound firmer than I felt. He shook his head. "Sit tight. Someone will come for you soon." Before I could ask what he meant, another man stepped out of the sedan. Same black suit, dark hair, serious face. He walked up to my car and looked in. Without thinking, I locked the doors. My heart was hammering. The first guy looked at me. "You saw something you shouldn't have. That's why you're here." I opened my mouth to argue, but I had no answers. I searched my memory, but only found a strange gap. "I don't know what you think I saw," I said. "I don't even remember half of today." The second man stepped closer, his face blank but intense. "That will change. We'll help you remember. Just relax." I wanted to slam the gas and get out of here, but my body wouldn't cooperate. There was this pressure in my chest, like the air had thickened. They didn't move or threaten me, but their presence was heavy. The first man pulled out a small notebook and wrote something. Then he showed it to me. "Where were you around 10 p.m. last night?" I frowned. "I was at home." He nodded slowly, then looked at his partner. "And yet you were seen somewhere you didn't belong. What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice shaking. The second man pulled a small silver badge from his coat, a plain metal rectangle with no words or logos. "You're going to want to cooperate," he said. The highway stretched silent around us with only a distant hum of cars. The sun was hotter now, and sweat dripped down my neck. "Why are you here?" I asked again. "What do you want from me?" The first man smiled. "Real, but just the tiniest edge of it to make sure you stay quiet." I could feel my hands trembling. "About what?" "A Thursday. I was driving home from work through the outskirts of New Richmond, Wisconsin. The stretch of road was familiar. I'd traveled it hundreds of times before, usually quiet and uneventful. Just after 7 p.m., something felt different. Odd lights hovered over the local coal-fired power plant. Not the usual work lights or warning beacons. These were smaller, brighter, arranged in a strange pattern that didn't make sense for standard equipment. They moved deliberately, almost like they were surveying or scanning the facility. Pulling over to the roadside, I kept my headlights off and cracked the window. The air carried a complex mix of scents: ozone, burning coal, and something sharp and metallic I couldn't quite place. Those lights blinked in what seemed like a coded sequence, not random but purposeful. When I tried to take a picture with my phone, the screen glitched and flickered. I set it aside, watching intently. Suddenly, a black sedan appeared. One man got out, watching me intensely. You'll remember soon enough, he said. The car slowly backed up, then sped away, leaving me alone on the shoulder. The quiet that followed felt different, heavier, like something unseen was lingering. I sat there for a long time before starting my car again, driving home in silence and constantly checking the rearview mirror. At home, I checked the clock. It was 3 p.m. somehow. There was a huge chunk of last night I couldn't remember, connected to those men in black. I never called the police or told anyone. No explanation made sense. All I knew was that I'd been watched, maybe controlled, and whatever happened wasn't. Over weirdest of all, I'd occasionally catch a glimpse of a black car just out of sight. Always when I was alone, always just for a second. And I don't think they're done with me yet. I was heading home from work around 7:10, driving past the power plant when I noticed something strange. The lights shifted slowly along the perimeter, then disappeared behind one of the cooling towers. Suddenly, a car pulled up behind me. When I checked the rearview mirror, I saw a dark shape without headlights. The engine was quiet. A window rolled down, revealing a man in his mid-40s with slick black hair and a dark suit that seemed out of place. He was clean-shaven with a stiff smile. "Evening," he said in a calm, professional tone that sent a chill down my spine. "Do you work at the power plant?" I responded that I was just passing through, working downtown on Main Street. As he nodded, another car arrived silently. A second man stepped out, similarly dressed in a black suit, pale, looking like he hadn't seen sunlight in ages. The first man leaned closer to my window, asking precisely what time I saw the lights. I explained I'd seen them hovering over the northern cooling towers for about 5 minutes before they moved behind the towers and vanished. The second man stepped forward, hands folded, asking if I'd seen any workers or maintenance crews. No, I told them. It was completely quiet. A tense silence followed. Then came the request to look at my phone. I declined. They didn't push, which somehow made me even more uncomfortable. I don't know what those lights were, I admitted, but it wasn't normal. The second man nodded slowly. "We understand. It's important no one else talks about this. The company is already aware and handling it." Company. They meant the power plant's management, and they were requesting discretion. The first man pulled out what looked like a government ID, not quite a police badge, though the details were blurred in the dim light. "Thank you for your cooperation," he said flatly. Then both men returned to their plateless cars and disappeared as quietly as they'd arrived. I was out on the trail by myself that weekend hiking in the northern Adirondacks. It was late September, with cool, clear weather perfect for hiking. The leaves were just starting to change, and the crisp scent of pine and wet earth filled the air. I'd planned a 2-day camping trip near a little abandoned cabin I'd heard about from some local hikers. It wasn't on any official maps, but I found it marked in an old guidebook I picked up in a dusty outdoor shop in Saranac Lake. After driving past the power plant on my way up, I noticed something strange. 2 cars were parked near the facility, and they drove off shortly after. The second car pulled ahead and disappeared first, with the first car following. Then the road was quiet again. I sat there for a minute, trying to shake off the creeping feeling that I'd just been watched in a way I didn't want to be. When I finally got back on the road, the power plant was dark again, just the usual orange glow from the towers. No lights, no movement. The next morning, I told my boyfriend Mark about the 2 men. He was skeptical, naturally. "Maybe some government agents or company security," he said. "Probably just making sure I don't spread rumors," but I wasn't so sure. Over the next few days, I kept catching weird things. My phone acted up, cutting out calls and messages without explanation. Once, while driving past the plant in daylight, I saw a black SUV parked near the gate. The windows were tinted so dark it looked like a black hole. No one got out, and the driver's seat was empty. A few nights later, I thought I heard footsteps outside my apartment window around 2 a.m. Looked, there was no one there, but the streetlight flickered strangely, and the air smelled metallic again. I started avoiding that stretch of road after work, taking the longer route, even though it added 20 minutes to my commute. I didn't want to see those lights again or the men in black. Weeks went by with nothing unusual until one evening when I was working late at the office. It was nearly 10 p.m., and the building was empty, except for me. I glanced out the window and thought I saw a dark figure standing across the street in the shadows of a street lamp. But when I looked again, nothing was there. I keep thinking about those lights, the men, and that badge I never got a proper look at. It all feels like part of something bigger I'm not supposed to know about. But I also know I'm probably just an ordinary person who stumbled onto something strange one night, and that maybe it's better left alone. I still drive past the plant sometimes, but I don't stop, and I never mention what I saw to anyone else. The cabin stood small and weathered, its broken windows and sagging porch telling a story of abandonment. Decades seemed to have passed since anyone had last set foot here. I set up my camp a little ways off, near a cluster of fir trees, ready to explore the surrounding area. Silence enveloped me, broken only by the typical forest sounds, bird calls and wind rustling through branches. As evening approached and the sun began to dip low, I decided to walk back toward the cabin, the time being around 7 p.m. The sky was fading into a deep blue twilight. That's when I noticed it. A glowing orb hovering about 30 yards from the cabin, just above the ground. It was round and white, but not harshly bright. Instead, it seemed to glow softly from within, as if lit by a gentle inner light. Motionless and suspended about 2 feet off the ground, the orb caught my attention. Immediately, at first, I thought it might be a forgotten lantern or campfire, but there was no smoke, no heat, no sound. The light remained too steady and pure. The forest had fallen into an unusual quiet, feeling different from any silence I'd experienced before. For about 5 minutes, I stood watching the orb. Then, it began moving slowly toward the cabin, gliding silently just above the ground. When it reached the porch, it hovered momentarily near a broken window before suddenly vanishing without a trace. That night, sleep eluded me. A faint humming noise seemed to vibrate intermittently, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I kept thinking about the orb, unable to shake the strange experience. Early the next morning, I packed up and started down the trail. Halfway back to my car at the trailhead, I encountered a man standing near the forest's edge. Dressed in a black suit more appropriate for a funeral or business meeting, he seemed oddly out of place in this wilderness. His dark hair was slicked back, and his expression was flat but intensely focused. When he called out, "Hey," I stopped. After a brief exchange, he made a cryptic statement. "You've been dreaming. The things you saw last night, the light, the cabin, that wasn't real. You should leave before nightfall. Don't come back." I looked at him, confused and slightly annoyed. Something told me this encounter was anything but ordinary. Nights at the old radio tower were usually quiet, but this one felt different. Working the late shift on the edge of Millbrook, a small upstate New York town, I climbed the spiral staircase to the broadcast room around 9 p.m. early November, had settled in with a cold fog rolling from the river just a mile away. The tower wasn't much, a rusty metal structure with a cramped room where I managed local emergency broadcasts for nearby communities. Windows were already streaked with condensation, and silence filled the space except for the soft equipment hum and occasional transmitter beeps. Around midnight, during routine checks, the radio began to crackle with static. At first, it seemed normal, just weather interference or a weak distant signal. But then the static grew louder, as if someone was deliberately pushing through with their own signal. This wasn't any code I recognized, just a low, drawn-out hiss that didn't belong. I tried adjusting the dials to clear the sound, but the static remained, filling the room with an almost intentional white noise. It felt different, almost alive. Earlier that week, I'd encountered something in the woods that I couldn't explain. He appeared suddenly with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You shouldn't be here," he'd said, his voice low but steady. When I mentioned I was just hiking, he paused and thanked me for my discretion before disappearing into the forest shadows. Sometimes in the quiet woods, I thought I saw a faint light flickering beyond the trees. I avoided that trail and told a few people about the encounter. Now, in this radio tower, that same unexplained feeling returned. Something was watching, waiting, trying to communicate. 1917, from the start. Static filled the room, creating an eerie atmosphere that set me on edge. I was adjusting the microphone, trying to hear through the interference, when something caught my eye outside the window. Standing on the metal catwalk beyond the thick fog was a man dressed entirely in black. This wasn't someone in typical work clothes. He wore a perfectly pressed suit and tie, with hair slicked back and skin so pale it seemed almost unnatural. His posture was unnervingly still, like a statue, except for one deliberate movement, his hand raised, palm out, signaling me to stop what I was doing. For a moment, I thought I might be imagining things. The dim room, the dense fog, the constant static, all of it could play tricks on your mind. But when I looked again, he was still there, watching me intently. His eyes seemed fixed on me, though I couldn't quite make out their color in the faint light of the control panel. I instinctively reached for the radio to transmit, but suddenly the static surged, cutting through my voice with a harsh burst. It was more than just interference. It felt like a warning, drowning out any attempt to communicate. Grabbing my jacket, I watched as the man suddenly turned and stepped off the catwalk, disappearing completely into the misty darkness. The morning shift didn't believe my story. They dismissed it as fatigue or fog-induced hallucination. But strange things began happening. My phone started malfunctioning. Calls wouldn't connect, texts sent themselves blank, and the screen would randomly flicker with static. I became increasingly paranoid, constantly feeling watched. Days later, in the parking lot behind the tower, I spotted a black sedan parked near the wood's edge. It was out of place, too clean, too polished for this area. Something wasn't right. This was just the beginning of something I couldn't explain. Nye was parked at this truck stop just off Interstate 40 in New Mexico, somewhere between Albuquerque and Gallup. Early morning, around 4:30 a.m., the sky was just starting to get light, but everything still felt wrapped in quiet. The parking lot was mostly empty, except for a few trucks scattered around, and the convenience store was still closed. I stepped out of my rig and stretched, glancing up at the sky. It was clear, maybe a little colder than usual for that time of year. The stars were still out, but I noticed something odd almost right away. There was this low, fast-moving light slicing across the horizon, moving way too quick for any plane I'd seen. I'm used to watching the sky a lot on these drives, and I've seen planes, helicopters, satellites, all kinds of stuff. But this didn't fit any of that. It was traveling maybe a few hundred feet off the ground and fast, much faster than any small plane. It didn't make any noise either. No engine hum, nothing. It just moved in a strange, controlled way. Later, the static started getting worse. My broadcast would cut in and out. Sometimes, just when I was about to sign off, I thought I heard faint whispers through the radio. Nothing I could make out clearly, but it was enough to make me pause. Then I saw 2 pickup trucks and older sedans most folks drove. I thought about ignoring it, but when I saw 2 men step out, both wearing dark suits similar to the man on the tower, I knew something was off. They moved calmly, almost like they were on a mission, but not in a hurry. One of them looked directly at me as I approached and gave a small nod. I stopped, feeling a cold knot in my stomach. "You need to be careful what you say," one of them said, voice low and serious. "Some things are better left alone." Before I could answer, they got back into the car and drove off, leaving me standing there in the cold fog swirling around my feet. I kept thinking about that man outside the window, the way he moved, and the warning. I never saw him or the 2 men again, but their presence lingered. Every time I climbed up that tower, I felt like I was being watched, like the fog itself was waiting for something. Eventually, the static faded and the broadcast returned to normal. But the feeling didn't go away. Sometimes late at night, when the wind is just right and the fog rolls in thick, I swear I can hear that same hiss creeping back through the radio, soft and steady, like a warning from somewhere just beyond the trees. Of what end behind the trees, what Hesam Dave has today, behind a ridge to the west. At first I thought maybe I was just tired or seeing a trick of light. But then it happened again, a quick blink, like a reflection or signal, and then nothing. Gone without a trace. I stood there staring at the spot where it vanished. Something about its movement didn't feel right. Back in my truck, I couldn't shake the feeling, so I decided to grab coffee at the local store, which opens around 5 a.m. By then the sky was getting brighter. That's when I noticed him. An older man, maybe late 50s, sitting near the back in a black suit. He wasn't your typical truck stop customer. No hat, no boots, just a plain black suit, buttoned up with a white shirt, polished shoes, tidy hair. He looked completely out of place. As I ordered my coffee, I tried to ignore him. But when I headed to the tables, he was suddenly standing right beside me. "Quite a night for watching the skies," he said, his voice calm but with a controlled tone that made me sit up straighter. "Yeah," I replied. "Saw something out there. Didn't look like any plane." He nodded slowly, as if he already knew. "Not many people notice," he said. "Most assume it's a trick of light or a military test, but sometimes it's something else." I looked around, making sure no one was listening. "What do you mean?" He leaned in slightly, like sharing a secret. "Sometimes it's better not to tell anyone." I couldn't tell if he was joking or serious. "Why is that?" I asked. "Because some things are complicated," he said, his eyes scanning the ceiling. "Not everything people see is meant to be explained. Not every sighting leads anywhere good." I took a sip of coffee, trying to stay calm. "You know a lot about this, huh?" He smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "You could say that. I'm here to help people understand when to speak up and when to stay quiet." "Who are you?" "Exactly." I frowned. He glanced toward the door, then back at me. "Just someone who's seen too much." Before I could respond, he pulled out a business card, blank except for a phone number and the name Mr. Gray. "Call if you have questions," he said, and then he was gone. I was hiking solo in the San Gabriel Mountains just north of Los Angeles on a crisp late spring afternoon. The trail stretched between Eden Canyon and Mount Wilson. Nothing special, just a quiet day to clear my head. I'd started around 3 p.m., planning to explore before sunset. The trail was nearly empty. Most hikers had turned back early, leaving me alone deeper into the wilderness. Around 5:30, I stopped at a clearing and took a drink of water. That's when something caught my eye to the east. At first, I thought it was a helicopter. But this was different. A smooth, metallic oval shape hovered silently above the treetops, maybe a few 100 feet up. No wings, no rotors. The low sun made it shimmer like oil-brushed metal. I pulled out my phone and managed to snap a few zoomed-in pictures before it vanished, not with a whoosh or sound, but simply blinking out like a switched-off lamp. I scanned the ridge. Nothing. No aircraft, no drone, just empty sky. A weird mix of excitement and disbelief froze me in place. I was completely alone. Later, I told a friend about what I saw. He laughed it off, suggesting it was probably just a military plane or drone test. But I know what I saw wasn't normal. Then came the stranger. He showed up at a truck stop suited up, warning me to keep quiet. He turned and walked away like he didn't want to linger. A knot formed in my stomach. Something didn't add up. I haven't called the number he gave me. Sometimes, as he said, it's better not to tell anyone. But that silent, fast light still haunts me during long desert drives. The sun dipped low. I returned to the railhead parking lot around 6:45. 2 men stood near my car, looking oddly out of place. They wore black suits with crisp white shirts and perfect ties, seeming more boardroom than backcountry. One was tall and sharp-featured, almost gaunt here, wearing dark glasses despite the fading daylight. Without introduction, they cut right to the point. "Did you take any photos today?" one asked. I hesitated, glancing at my phone. "Yeah, I got a couple pictures of something weird near the ridge," I responded. The taller man's eyes narrowed slightly, his expression unchanging. "We need you to delete those photos for everyone's safety," he stated firmly. Caught off guard, I asked, "Why? What's going on?" The shorter man responded flatly, "No reason for you to know. It's best if you forget what you saw and don't share anything." My stomach tightened. This didn't feel right. When I said I wasn't comfortable deleting the photos, they didn't back down. The shorter man pulled out a small black device, saying, "We don't want to escalate this. You cooperate and nothing happens. Look, I don't want trouble. I'm just a hiker." After a tense moment, they turned and walked to a dark sedan. The car pulled out slowly, then sped away. I stood there, heart racing, hands slightly shaking. Opening my phone, I looked at the blurry shots of a metallic shape against the sky. They were real. Part of me wanted to wipe everything clean, but another part resisted. I felt I'd accidentally discovered something I wasn't meant to see. That night, sleep came in fitful moments. Something significant had happened, and those mysterious men made it clear I'd stumbled onto something far beyond an ordinary hike. Others felt like a half-remembered dream, but the photos were on my phone and the memory was sharp. I was out by Lake Pendereil in northern Idaho, just past dusk on a chilly spring evening. I hadn't planned to be there long. Just wanted to unwind after work and maybe get some shots of the stars or something. The weather was clear but crisp, the kind of cold that makes your breath visible if you stop moving. I parked on the gravel road that leads down to a small public fishing spot. It's a quiet place. Not a lot of people come around that late, especially on a weekday. About an hour in, I noticed some faint lights flickering just above the tree line on the far side of the lake. They weren't like plane lights, too scattered and irregular to be aircraft. At first, I thought it might be a campfire, but the colors kept shifting. Red, green, pale blue, almost like those LED party lights, but without any pattern. I grabbed my phone and my camera, figuring I'd try to catch some long exposure shots of the water and sky. The lake surface was mostly still, reflecting the stars perfectly. I started recording video on my phone, zooming in to get a better look. The lights moved slowly, like they were floating just above the trees, but the way they moved didn't make sense. I checked the news for anything about unusual sightings. No missing persons, no accidents, no government statements. The next day, I drove back up to the trailhead, hoping to find something. Maybe another sign, a clue. The parking lot was empty, except for my car. No black suits, no sedan. I hiked a little ways up the trail, but the ridge was quiet, normal. No lights, no metallic shapes. I told a few close friends about the encounter with the men, but not the object. No one really believed me, and I didn't push it. I didn't want the photos online or anywhere else. Weeks later, sometimes when I'm alone, I think about those two men, how calmly and quietly they told me to delete the photos for everyone's safety. It's strange how normal their presence was, how confident, like they were used to it, used to people seeing things they shouldn't. I never saw them again. The photos stayed on my phone for a while, but eventually I did delete them. Not because I wanted to, but because I felt it was safer that way. Still, every now and then when I'm out hiking or just looking up at the sky, I wonder if they're watching, making sure I'm keeping quiet. Or if the thing I saw is still out here, hiding just beyond the ridge, waiting for the next person to notice. No night birds, no distant highway sounds, just the crunch of my boots on pine needles. Two men in black suits were waiting near my truck, wearing dark sunglasses despite the sunset. One tall with thinning hair slicked back, the other with a square jaw and an expressionless face. Earlier I'd been filming something strange by the lake, lights that blinked and shifted, moving in a pattern too deliberate to be a drone or boat. They'd vanished behind a thick cluster of firs after about 10 minutes. When I checked the video, the lights looked grainy but definitely present, even in shifting colors. My phone started acting weird afterward. Glitching, apps crashing, screen flickering. I rebooted twice, but nothing helped. The GPS stopped working, though cellular data remained active. I couldn't locate myself on any map. The taller man spoke first. "Are you the one who took videos near the lake?" His voice was calm but firm. When I confirmed, he nodded. "We're here about the device you used." The second man stepped forward. "There's a technical issue. We need to take it and make some checks." "Why?" "What kind of issue?" "Something on the device could cause problems if left unchecked," the first man explained. "For everyone's safety, it's best if we have it." I felt my stomach tighten. I don't think I'm comfortable handing it over. The tall man's gaze didn't waver. "We're not asking. Just give us the phone." My heart raced, but I tried to stay steady. North time, we were driving through a stretch of road cutting deep into dense forest with barely anything else around. Jess was driving, and I was watching the landscape when something caught my eye. Strange lights flickered in the woods, not like headlights or campfires, but something different. Later, when I tried to show people the video I'd recorded, two men showed up, dressed strangely, demanding my phone. One had a square jaw and pulled out a small black case with electronic gadgets I didn't recognize. "You can see the video," I told them, but they weren't interested in watching. They wanted my phone. When I asked why I should trust them, the tall man's voice dropped, warning me that things like this don't end well if mishandled. I got in my truck and drove away, catching them standing motionless in my rearview mirror. During the drive home, my phone started acting strange, flickering, then going completely black. No matter how many times I tried turning it on, nothing worked. That night, other electronics in my house began acting up too. The Wi-Fi router dropped signal, lights dimmed briefly. Nothing major, but definitely odd. The next day, an unknown number called. A clipped voice said, "We're calling regarding your device," then abruptly hung up when I tried to ask questions. My phone powered on, but all the video files were gone. even older recordings wiped clean. I never heard from those men in black again. The whole incident still bugs me. Why those lights? Why were they so interested in a simple video from a quiet lake? It feels like something between reality and a bad dream that I can't shake. But I know what I saw. Do know. We were driving near Lake Champlain, heading to a cabin we'd rented for a quiet getaway. The sky was a deep blue bordering on black, with just enough light hanging on after sunset. Cold air and dampness from earlier rain made the road slick, and a low fog started creeping along the tree edges. Hours into our journey, we'd been mostly silent, enjoying the peaceful rhythm of tires on asphalt. About 20 miles from our turnoff, a small rest area appeared on the right, just a gravel patch with a few picnic tables and trash bins. A dark sedan caught my eye, parked oddly under a flickering lamppost. It was facing the wrong way, angled toward the forest, like someone wasn't planning to stay long. I pointed it out to Jess. Look at that car. Doesn't seem right, does it? She glanced over. Yeah, that's weird. Should we pull in? Maybe someone needs help. As we slowed, the driver's door opened. A man in a dark suit stepped out. Mid-50s, pale complexion, with neatly slicked back hair. His expression was unreadable. Not angry, not friendly, just serious. He didn't wave or call out. Instead, he stood in the dim light, staring directly at us. Jess nearly stopped the car. You okay? She asked softly. The man took a slow step toward the road, his eyes locking onto ours. Turn back, he said in a low, steady voice, like stating a fact. Turn back before it's too late. His words caught me off guard. I blinked, expecting some explanation. Jess looked confused. What do you mean? I asked, but he didn't answer. Instead, he stepped back toward the shadows. Then, strangely, he seemed to fade into the darkness, not by running, but as if the light around him dimmed and blended into the night until he vanished completely. The moment felt surreal had he actually disappeared. The moment felt surreal had he actually disappeared. I wanted to tell her I might have seen him duck into the trees or slip around a corner, but deep down, I wasn't certain about what I'd witnessed. The car felt heavier as we pulled back onto the road, the drive growing increasingly tense. We kept scanning our surroundings, Jess checking the rearview mirror, me watching the road behind us, half expecting to see that black sedan trailing us. Nothing appeared. When we reached the cabin, everything felt different. The forest's usual sounds, wind rustling through pines, birds settling for the night, now seemed thicker, more watchful. That night, sleep eluded me. The man's strange warning echoed in my mind, and I tried checking my phone for any captured evidence, only to find the battery inexplicably dead. The next morning, I returned to the rest area, hoping to find some trace of the mysterious man or his car. The gravel spot was empty, with only tire tracks leading toward the forest. No footprints, nothing unusual. I snapped a few photos despite the thick fog and weak morning light. That afternoon, Jess shared a bizarre dream, walking down a road and hearing a disembodied voice telling her to stop, though no one was present. The feeling lingered with her throughout the day. Over the next 2 days, strange occurrences multiplied. My phone flickered with static before dying randomly. Jess's watch stopped working despite being fully charged. The cabin's power flickered unexpectedly even during clear weather. We decided to leave a day early. Our return drive was quiet. I kept glancing at the side mirrors, watching for the black sedan or the man's face in the woods. But nothing materialized. Now the entire experience feels like a half-remembered dream, or a trick of light, yet certain details remain vivid. The device glitches, Jess's unsettling dream, and that haunting voice warning us to turn back. I'm still uncertain what we encountered, or what it wanted, but one thing became clear. Something about that forest had, but it seems that the original text you intended to share is missing or was not included in your message. Could you please provide the full text you would like me to rewrite?